Hi, this is Doug Manch, and you're listening to Into the Night, a Moon Knight podcast.
Yes, welcome back, loony listeners. You are listening to Into the Night, a Moon Knight podcast. This is episode 114, and I'm back in Grant Mansion. In my plush seat, I have a very special guest with me for another ISLA RA book session. He's just hung his coat up on the rack. He's made his way here. We're in front of a roaring fire. You can hear some classical music in the background. With me is Derek O'Neill from TV Podcast Industries. Hi, Derek.
Hello there, Ray. This place is beautiful.
Oh, thank you very much. It has a little bit of a musty smell, maybe a little bit of gunpowder, but that comes with the territory with Moon Knight, I guess. Again, he's off cavorting, and he's asked me to house it, which I don't mind. You know, I always tend to get guests over. But Derek, so glad to have you with us. I keep on saying us. It's just me. When I say us, I mean my identities, okay?
There you go. Yeah, multiple personalities, right?
That's it. Very glad to have you with us. It's been a long time coming, but you've been on the show in the past, right?
Yes, I think we did a little bit of voice work for some of your early episodes. Did some of the synopsis for some of your issues that you were talking about early on. It's been a long time. Yeah.
It's been ages, and between then as well, we've had your colleague Chris Jones on a couple of times. Chris has been fantastic. A bit earlier on, I mentioned John, another one of the hosts. He was the absolute first guest that we ever had on our show. So we hold, previously known Defenders TV podcast dear to our hearts. But yeah, no,
and we hold ITK to really close to our hearts. You guys have been around now 114 episodes. I'm delighted for you guys. I really feel very privileged to be on the second century of the podcast. Yeah, that's quite cool.
Yeah, it's great. It's great to have you on. I'm beaming because I can't believe that I'm actually sitting here in front of you. You know, in front of this roaring fire and with this bearskin rug, to chat about your favourite books. Now, before we get into that, just a little spiel to first-time listeners. This is our ISLA RA book session, so Derek has been invited over to Grant Mansion to tell us about his Desert Island books, or what I like to call the ISLA RA books. 4 books that, 4 single issues that he cannot live without. If he was stuck on a desert island, these are the 4 books that he would take with him. Now, before that as well, we'd like to ask, a couple of questions to Derek as well, just to get to know him, what we do. We love to know more about our fellow loonies. So we usually ask the same set of questions, Derek, towards you, a little catered to you specifically towards the end. Yeah. But I'd like to first open the account with, how did you first get into comics?
Well, I'm gonna save a tiny bit of this story for later on for one of my choices for one of my books, if that's all right. Yeah, sure. I think Ireland's a bit weird. This is where I'm from. We didn't have a huge amount of access to American comic books as such. What we had was the Marvel UK reprints of multiple storylines and kind of all over the place. I don't know whether people have talked about this before on the podcast here at Ray, but effectively it was kind of like reading just bits of stories, and there was there's characters like Spider-Man was in there, and they had Captain Britain was in there, and we had bits of Fantastic Four and all of these kind of characters appearing, and you just pick them up on the rack every week. But there was definitely no collecting until I was probably in my teenage years. So most of my fandom for superheroes kind of came from TV shows and movies more than anything else. Those are the things that I was obsessing about back in the 80s when I was in my early years, and then kind of pick up a comic book here and go, oh, I recognize that character from the cartoons like Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends. I recognize Spider-Man and all of those characters. I think the way they compile those books would usually be kind of connected to bringing in a bunch of other characters from the Marvel universe as crossover stories. Right. That's probably my first experience of those comic books would have been that. So kind of picking them up just off the rack.
Right. That really actually interests me because I have heard about it before as well, Derek. I think from a lot of European listeners and people that I get in touch with. So are they, like you're saying, like it's a mishmash of stories and stuff and kind of all kind of bundled together? Are they canon? Like, are they part of canon? So they took, say, Fantastic Four issue 355, and they took. So are they independent stories? Like, are they just kind of made up through Marvel UK? Would that be?
There's a kind of a mix of both, actually. And I was reading a little bit about it because I was trying to remember what the name of the book was. To be honest.
Yeah. Right. Okay. It's it's very strange. I mean, like, I wonder if the collector would. I don't know, value those sorts of comics. I mean, they sound like they're. I don't know. It's a very strange. We don't have anything like that over here, obviously.
Yeah, like a lot of them would have been put together to kind of combat, the UK books at the time, things like the Beano and the Dandy, the kind of the funny books, I suppose, if you've ever seen them. There's the normal comic books, which had very short stories, 3 or 4 pages long. And then they would effectively reprint a few pages or a full storyline from one of the Marvel books, and then put a couple of backup stories. So you did have some characters being created specifically for Marvel UK throughout the 80s, and you had some stories like there is some Nick Fury stories that were only appeared in the UK and never appeared reprinted outside of there. So some of those would be absolutely wanted, those kind of stories that were only created there and never reprinted. But for the most part, it was kind of like, I think, if I remember rightly, one of them would have been they'd take 3 or 4 issues, spread it over a few months, and it might even be out of order, just to give a story and just give some backup stories. But it wasn't made for collectors as such. It was kind of made for something for kids to read when they were waiting in the dentist office and stuff.
Yeah. Was it in colour or black and white? Or?
It was in black and white.
Oh,
for
really?
The most part, yeah, with a colour cover. Yeah. Right.
That's how I was kind of imagining it. And was it like a fully sized one, or were they kind of small digest kind of books?
If I remember rightly, they were full size. They were kind of they would sit right beside a Beano comic, that kind of size. If you know that size, of course.
Yeah.
I always forget.
Yeah, right.
People might not have seen Beano on the stands.
And so you mentioned so a lot of your kind of gateway to comics books and characters were through the TV shows. We're talking like we're about the same vintage, Derek.
I think we're about
I'm comfortable
the same,
to say. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So, the Greatest American Hero. I'm throwing a few out here for you. Did that tickle your fancy?
Absolutely, that was every Saturday night, along with a bit of the A-Team and a bit of Knight Rider and all that kind of stuff. We definitely got repeats of the Spider-Man live-action TV show. I'm absolutely certain that Incredible Hulk was still going when I was a young TV watcher. So yeah, there's lots of stuff.
There was a live-action Spider-Man show?
Yeah,
really?
Absolutely.
Oh wow!
Yeah.
I only remember the movie with the guy that used to be in The Sound of Music.
There you go, same guy.
Was the same guy? He had a TV show?
Yeah.
Wow,
yes,
okay.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Oh.
So now it would have been, because obviously being in Ireland, it would have been released probably a couple of years after it was on in the US. But yeah, I definitely remember watching that when I was very young. It was basically a guy with a web made out of rope that he just throw over the top of people. But it went on for quite a while.
Right, yeah, I remember the movie. The movie was, it kind of etched in my mind a bit. I remember he went on top of, was it Empire State Building? He had some sort of mind control thing on him. Had you seen the movie as well, Derek?
I am certain that I have. It's been a long time. It's one of those ones that's definitely burnt into the back of my memory. And I certainly remember playing at being Spider-Man in school the following week. But I probably couldn't go in depth into the details of the storylines. But it was much more of protect the city from bank robbers type guy. I don't think there was very many supervillains in there.
No, and I do remember one of the lasting memories is him wall crawling. But they used to always wall crawl like from a distance because they couldn't show, obviously they couldn't let you know that there were the strings and cables holding him up. But it was pretty impressive because like he tended to scale the wall pretty quickly. Yeah,
and I think they used a similar technique that they used on Batman, where they early series from the 60s where they just kind of had him just going sideways up a piece of ground and just turning the camera sideways.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. That old chestnut. Yeah, that that worked well. And of course, The Incredible Hulk. That was one of my favourite shows as well. I'm sure you watched it on religiously as well.
Absolutely, yeah. Bill Bixby, fantastic in that role. Always loved it. Again, the way that we had to watch these shows as the procedurals that they were, they weren't built because they weren't built in the way the shows are now, where you're going to be watching the next episode next week. You never know when you're going to see another episode. They're completely out of order. They're completely standalone. It's every episode was guy comes into town, has to solve a problem. Guy leaves town at the end of episode. So perfectly built for us as kids.
It was great. And the big difference for me, I guess, for that show was there's always that tinge of sadness at the end. That piano music. The music was haunting. I think it was really very memorable.
I think every single person of our age group, if you play the Lonely Man theme, the theme from that, will get a little tear in their eye. Yeah. Or will pick up a bag and throw it over one shoulder and start to walk away.
I sometimes think that, the amount of emotion that generated was way more than was needed for the TV show. You know what I mean? Like, it was too powerful for it, but I'm glad it was in there. It was really good. I don't know if you've watched any of the shows recently, Derek. I watched some of them. Unfortunately for me, like, they've dated. I don't know if you still like them. So they but that was a great show. Yeah, definitely.
They've definitely dated. And I think that's the thing you learn over time. I'm sure we'll get a little bit into my podcasting and I suppose why I'm here. But one of the big things for us as kids and these shows that were there, they were just there to show off the character. They weren't there and fill up a bit of time on TV, really. It certainly wasn't a major storyline that was playing out over the course of however many seasons these shows got. They gave you a lovely storyline, but they didn't play into it every single week. I remember a disco episode, I remember a comedy episode, I remember everything going on, horror episodes, stuff like that, just throwing in there just to fill up some time on TV. They certainly didn't have the structure that we have now, where you have to watch a whole 100 episodes to get what's happening in the current episode. Definitely wasn't like that. So.
Absolutely, and I know it was kind of further down the track. Are you a big... had you watched The X-Files a lot? Are you a big fan, or...?
Do you know, weirdly, X-Files, there's a couple of TV shows that should be right in my wheelhouse, and X-Files is absolutely one of them, and I only watched about 6 episodes, and it's terrible.
Oh, I know.
Yeah. It's one of those shows that kind of came out at a time when I was traveling quite a bit. I was traveling to the US when it was very popular, and it was on very late at night as well. It was on about 11 or 12 p.m. in Ireland. It was kind of put into this kind of dead zone late at night, and became really this cult hit when I didn't have a huge amount of friends that were into cult stuff to push it on me. But after the fact, I have seen a lot of it since. My podcasting partner John is a huge fan. He showed me all of the best episodes, but I missed them all at the time. So.
Oh no, okay. Well, because I was about to say, because I'm sure there are other shows before that did it, but that started to really tie a larger arc in the whole series. It was very much. I mean, it started out as like a monster of the week kind of thing as well, isolated cases. But then they introduced the whole conspiracy thing. The aliens are out there, and that started to have a running thread. And I think that's kind of where, you see like the TV shows these days, where they are very much attuned of having a huge arc, which you kind of have to know. Even like, Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., even that, I don't know, what would you say for that? That would conceivably be kind of, you can jump in really to any episode, I'd say. Possibly. I'd say there's probably the big difference with these shows is that they're 22 episodes. With Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. particularly, it's 22 episodes, and what I see a lot now that I probably wouldn't have seen 10 years ago, and I've kind of reacted a little bit sometimes in our podcast about it, I see people comment about TV shows now going, oh, that was a wasted episode. Or why can't they just get to the point and just get back to the story, as if they want the show to finish.
And I'm not like that. I'm not that guy that wants, if I go to the cinema and see a 2-hour movie, I want to see a start, middle, and end. I get that. But if I'm watching a TV show and the characters are well drawn, I could watch that show for 10 years, Walking Dead. I can totally stay with the characters. If it's well written and they're doing things that I'm interested in, I can stay with it forever, like I did when I was a kid. I still have that in mind. But when people tell me that, the Marvel Netflix shows should be less than 13 episodes, I'm kind of going, well, justify that. Tell me why you didn't like 5 episodes of that show. Maybe the show just wasn't for you. If you didn't like spending time with the characters, maybe it just wasn't for you. But that's kind of bugbear.
Yeah, no, that's a very good point actually, because that really has come up. I was at the my local comic book store just today, talking to Jim, who's the manager over there. And we're talking about The Boys, which TV podcast industries are currently covering. Fantastic series, Derek. I'm really slow now with watching TV shows. I'm only up to the 3rd episode, so but I'm saving your episodes, so I don't get spoiled or anything. So I'm up to speed with TV podcast industries, but I'm obviously watching it, listening to it as I watch. As I finish watching each episode. But we were talking about the episodes there, and I believe, is it 8 episodes for the whole season for The Boys?
That's right, yeah, just the 8 episodes.
Oh, yeah, just the 8 episodes. It's... and we're talking about how kind of it's leaning more towards, I guess, the like the BBC productions and stuff, where TV shows, there are a lot less episodes, but a lot better produced each, with the money spent elsewhere. But I do like your point about how the 13 episodes, it is a TV show, isn't it? People do kind of view it and expect it to be more like a movie now because it's so tied and it's so kind of tight, like TV shows now in general.
Yeah, I think part of it comes from the Netflix idea of dropping a show all in one day, and people want to finish it. There's that attitude of the first thing, which is the internet commenting of, I want to be the first to say I finished it. So if you tell me I have to watch 22 hours of it, well, I can't do that in one day. So why not give me half that time and then I can do it in one day, But I suppose you mentioned the BBC thing of it being, 6 to 8 episodes on a TV show. There are absolutely terrible BBC shows as well. That are 6 straight episodes long.
Yeah, okay.
What breaks out of the UK and into American and into Australia and stuff, a lot of those are the really good productions. So and remember, BBC is license fee funded in the UK, so they're now partnering up with people like HBO and Showtime in the US to make these shows,
right,
to get more budget into them. But the reason why it was 6 episodes is because they can't really justify spending loads of taxpayers' money on 22 episodes of Doctor Who, for example. Actually, why don't you give us more episodes of the news than instead of Doctor Who would probably be a lot of the kind of questions that will come out there. But no, I totally agree. The idea of short form storytelling is really good as well, but it's kind of, to me, sometimes it's kind of in between that 22 episode show and the movies. It's somewhere in between the two of those. And the one thing I would say about The Boys, and I found it really funny, they were out promoting The Boys at San Diego Comic-Con the week before it was released, and they announced season 2 was coming.
Yeah, very quick.
So I was kind of going, hang on a second. So I know you're saying it's 8 episodes, but actually you've told us it's 16 episodes split in half over the course of 2 years. That's the way I'd see it. But.
Okay, so the other 8 episodes have been filmed. Has that been released, or like
they're currently filming the second season right now. They started filming last week.
So closely behind after filming the first season, right? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so you know what I mean. It kind of feels a little bit different than it has been in the past.
Yeah. Interesting stuff. No, especially with the BBC and all that. Anyway, look, we're bringing this back a little bit as well. Look, I wanted to get your thoughts. Actually, before I get into how you get into Moon Knight, I wanted to know how you. Was it through those books that you saw from the newsstand? How do you get into Nick Fury? Like what made you decide? Yep, I'm going to really follow this title.
I am going to save that story for our top 4, because that is absolutely the reason I got into Nick Fury, from the top 4. But I will preface it by saying he was in those Marvel UK comics. He was quite a regular backup. He was also the Sergeant Fury character, which was the earlier version of Nick Fury, where he was a sergeant in the army. In World War II, there was a lot of war comics that were going on in the UK at the time, and you would absolutely see Fury on the shelves quite regularly on the cover of his own UK book, telling stories about war in war comics. So I was very aware of him throughout those early years, and the book that I'm going to talk about later on is the reason why I became a Nick Fury fan. There you go. Okay,
cool. we'll put a pin in it there, and we'll come back, because hopefully, if you can remind me if I forget, it's just also about, like, war, as you mentioned, war comics and espionage. I'll get into that once we get into that story. Okay, well, also another one of the core questions we do ask. Obviously, this is a Moon Knight podcast. Derek, now I'm actually not too familiar with how familiar you are with Moon Knight, but how did you get into or aware of Moon Knight?
You know, I'm going to give you guys most of the credit for that, to be completely honest.
Oh, right. Okay.
I have gone back through, because I recently went through my whole collection of comics. We moved countries about 2 years ago. We moved to Switzerland from Ireland about 2 years ago. And I have all my comic books with me, and I recently went through them all to kind of just make sure I knew exactly what was in the collection. And I have tons of comics that feature Moon Knight over the years. I was an avid collector when I was collecting books of things like Marvel Team Up and Marvel 2-in-1. And there's quite a few issues that Moon Knight popped in with The Thing, weirdly, and with Spider-Man, which kind of is doable. But I've definitely seen Moon Knight many times in those kind of books. I suppose, apart from my very singular focus in Marvel on Nick Fury, which is a weird focus. We'll definitely be going into that later. Mm-hmm. But apart from that, I've certainly picked up a lot of team books more than anything else. And seeing Moon Knight pop in and out of those books was always interesting. But over the last couple of years, I would say you guys have opened my eyes quite significantly to the world of Moon Knight and how interesting and different he is as a character to what is in Marvel.
I mean, having seen him in those team-ups and in the team books as well, were you aware of, like, his situation, as in, like, multiple identities and stuff, or did you see him more of a Batman kind of rip-off?
Yes, you're not allowed to say that. You're not allowed to say that. No,
I'll beat myself out, don't worry.
I'd say, honestly, you know, at times I'd probably confuse him with Cloak from Cloak and Dagger. Kind of character, you know, because of the mask and the look. I knew he had a white cape rather than a black cape, effectively, which made the big difference between Cloak and Moon Knight. But he seemed like another brawler, effectively, another character that would come in and beat people up. And side by side with some of the heroes, but they never really went in too deep into the character of Moon Knight. So I wouldn't have known much about him at all until I started reading some of the books more recently that have gone in depth into.
Yeah, I think that's probably also due to kind of two things as well. I mean, one, as you kind of alluded to, he's seen as a brawler, and he's always, I guess, his skills or his power sets has always been quite ambiguous. You never really know what he can do. Is he just a normal dude, you know, who happens to be highly skilled running around? Like, even Daredevil's a great fighter, but at least he's got, you know, heightened senses and all that. With someone so flamboyantly dressed, you'd expect that there'd be something, you know, fantastic to him. As in, he is fantastic, but I mean, like, you know, he does get the moon powers in Volume 2, but again, that was a very fleeting thing. One of the books, no spoilers, one of the books of Derek's does contain Moon Knight in there, so that's pretty cool as well. I like that, and I like the variant cover as well, Derek. That was pretty good. Sorry, just before we get into that as well, I just want to, again, another thing to the listeners. So in the links connected to this episode are Derek's top 4 books now. I'll leave it up to you, the listeners. You can either have a click now and discover what books Derek will take with him to the Isla Ra and read them, and then come back and listen to us discussing it, or you can just wait and be surprised as we reveal them when Derek and I get into them.
With a flourish.
Yeah, they're pretty cool indeed. Derek, I don't know about you. Are you up for a bit of a tipple?
Oh, yes, please.
Excellent. Let me just ring this little bell. Okay, now, while we just wait for Samuel's, I'm going to go into another one of our core questions, Derek. Now, as mentioned before, Chris Jones from TV Podcast Industries has been on the show, and he has kind of given a bit of an insight how he kind of met up with you and John, and how Defenders TV Podcast kind of started. But I want to hear it, I guess, from you, Derek. Like podcasting, how did you catch the bug of podcasting?
Why the hell have you recorded 400 episodes is what you're really asking. I know. It's very weird. I started out listening to podcasts because I'm a gamer, and I started listening to podcasts of reviews of games, effectively, years ago. So I think Podcast Beyond would be probably the biggest one. I'm a PlayStation gamer particularly, and they provided just this really interesting discussion format where they took 4 or 5 games that were coming out that week, some news, and chatted about them every week, and the personalities of the people on there just really made me interested. And then kind of I joined the community of people that talked within PlayStation and Beyond community, so started to talk to all of them about games and stuff, and then so I listened to that. It must have been a year. It was the only podcast I listened to, basically, just over and over again.
Was it a weekly?
Episodes. It was a weekly podcast, yeah. And weirdly, then Walking Dead, the announcement came out, I think, around the time when I was listening to podcasts, that Walking Dead was becoming a TV show. And I was like, I wonder, do they do TV podcasts? Little knowing that really the big podcasting section is something Lost, I think, kind of kicked off TV podcasting, this idea of watching a TV show and talking about the connections and what could possibly be happening, this whole concept. So I came to listening to TV podcasting a bit later than most people. But it was because of Walking Dead. I didn't have any friends at the time that were reading comic books. I loved the Walking Dead comic book, and I knew the show was coming out, and I really wanted to listen to a show that had the connection to people that would read the comic books and watch the TV show. So that's kind of where my love for it came from, particularly a podcast called The Walking Dead Cast, which had 2 of my favorite people in the world now. They're good friends of mine now, but 2 of them are hosted the podcast and just went back and forth every episode and talked about comic books and talked about the show. So that's kind of where my love came from for it. And then it felt like, and I think you've probably had this moment where you go, well, if they can do it, why can't I?
That's where I was I was going to ask you next, because the technical side of it. But yeah, you're right on point. It was kind of like the same thing. It's like, well, it can't be that hard, can it? Can it? So,
exactly. Yeah. If these guys can do it, I can do it, right?
That's right.
Yeah, and then you realise that everything that you think works and everything that you think is good for recording doesn't actually work as well as you think it does, and all your knowledge of the computer that you think doesn't work either. So I probably went into this kind of this thing that a lot of people that podcast go through, which is, I'll start it in 4 or 5 months when I write a good outline, or I'll start it in 4 or 5 months when I get the right TV show to talk about, or whatever it is, and doubting that you're going to be able to do it, and that's where I missed Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., I suppose, would be where, I suppose that's where we were aiming for the start of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., kicking off with the review of episode 1 of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. That's where we were aiming for, and we just missed it completely because life took over, and I was totally bummed about the idea of not starting podcasting about my favourite character with the knowledge that I had of the character in the comic books. And then found some amazing podcasts out there that already covered it and went, they're doing that one.
Yeah.
They're doing that one. I'll find something else in the future.
And so was it always, was John and Chris always on board, or at least John was always on board as well? Was he going through the same, realisation of podcasting as you at the same time?
Yes, John, definitely. I think I'm the one that was bringing home the podcast and going, listen to this one, and now check out this one, and now try this one. So I was bringing them home to him and going, right, you need to get on board, you need to get started, and we need to work out how to do a podcast about this stuff. Because myself and John's relationship absolutely is, we talk so much about movies and talk so much about TV shows and so much about comic books. The two of us would just, without having a microphone anywhere near us, we would just talk about that stuff anyway. So it always felt like the right choice to have John involved.
Okay, so the inclination, I guess, of just chatting and it being a chat amongst yourselves to discuss something seemed to be like a very natural thing. But to actually, stick a microphone in front of you, was there any reservations on your behalf or John in doing it? And if so, who kind of pushed the other? I guess it was yourself, yeah? To push.
Yeah, I think Chris calls me the producer, and I have been the producer of the podcast before. I was the only editor on it, which I am now. I'm the kind of writer editor, and I kind of set up the episodes for the guys to just be able to talk. But I'm also the guy that has the leash to calm them down when we need to make sure that this podcast can be listened to by more than 5 people as well. So we need to calm down the language. We need to talk a little bit less about the sex, that kind of stuff. Which because we've said it's a PG podcast,
they're the best bits, Derek.
That's the outtakes. Yes, there's a few paths you can't go down if you call yourself a PG podcast, which we have done for 400 episodes. So I do have to rein them in occasionally, but yeah, that's always where a lot of the fun that we get out of podcasting comes from, that sometimes we can't share with our listeners.
Yeah. and of course, so yourself and John and Chris came on board. I remember Chris saying that work colleague, an ex-work colleague, that's how you kind of knew each other. So were you and Chris listening to the same sorts of things as well, and you pitched this idea to Chris to jump on board?
Chris is a massive Kevin Smith fan, and if you're a Kevin Smith fan, you love podcasts, basically. So, Kevin Smith
of course. Oh, yes.
The creator of that side of the podcast universe. So, so Chris is also a massive gamer as well. And back in the days when I used to smoke, and myself and Chris worked together, so both of us would go out for cigarettes and talk about the nerdy stuff in the world, and then we get on to gaming and we get on to podcasting quite a bit. So myself and John started out the Gotham TV podcast, and then about 6 to 8 months later, oh gosh, I have to get my timings right, it might even be a year later, we kicked off Defenders TV podcast talking about Marvel stuff, and we needed another voice. We needed something different, because with Gotham TV podcast we were doing 22 episodes, which is half a year of commitment for myself and John. John used to travel a lot for work as well, so John and myself, I think, did every single episode of Gotham TV podcast, whereas we needed another couple of voices in for Defenders TV podcast, so that we could at least hand off and say, right, if I'm not here, someone else can take my place or John's place. So that's kind of where it came from. And yeah, Chris and myself would talk constantly about all this stuff anyway, so it was a natural choice.
Ah, excellent. And again, I think I mentioned this with Chris. I do remember. Was it Irene? Was
Irene,
the
yes.
Fourth? Did I get her name right?
Yes.
No.
Yes, you did, absolutely, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Cool.
Irene, she was our original 4th host. Very much came from the idea of Defenders TV podcast, because Defenders on Netflix had the 4 characters, had Luke Cage, Iron Fist, Daredevil, and Jessica Jones. So so we had to have Irene in there. We did want a female perspective. She is someone that loves TV shows and movies as well, and we did want to have that female perspective coming into such a massive undertaking that was the Marvel Netflix shows. So it was great having her involved when she could be involved at the time. I did love, I think in our first or second episode when we introduced, and I think we started to kind of jokingly say that which character we were in the Defenders TV podcast, and I loved that. I think Chris came in first and said he's Jessica Jones. His surname is Jones. So I love the kind of joke about that Chris would always take Jessica Jones as his character, and I would be struggling finding which of the other 3 she's supposed to be. But,
yeah, exactly.
But she thought it was hilarious as well. So
yeah. No, that's good. No, it's great. And does she? I mean, does she still? Do you guys still regularly? Obviously, you do. It's not like she's like gone somewhere. I mean, you regularly still,
she's still right.
Meet up and stuff. Still like talking about about TV shows with her and.
Yeah, she came to visit us in Switzerland about 3 weeks ago. So she's been over quite recently. We haven't gotten a mic in front of her face, unfortunately, for quite a while. We tried to get it for our, I think it was our 200th episode of 200 episodes. I think it was our 200th episode of Defenders TV podcast. We tried to get her in time, but unfortunately, just timing didn't work out. So we haven't been able to get her back on board. But that's just life. Sometimes it happens.
No, it is true. Yeah, you're right. I mean, life and people have obviously commitments and stuff. But that's a shame. Like, because I do remember fondly the early episodes that you guys did, and I definitely remember the intros that you guys that you guys, how you introduced yourself. I thought that was pretty funny. It was really cool.
I think that was the first negative review we received on
What?
iTunes.
Really?
Yep. The first negative review we received was
someone
like
didn't
a
like
2-star review going, yeah, they were it was like a 2-star review saying these guys think they're funny. They should stick to the serious stuff.
Really?
I love negative reviews. They're hilarious. But,
Oh, yeah, I know they are, aren't they? Oh, well, yeah. Anyway, the people can be very. I hear some foot. Thank you. Oh, here's Samuels. Thank you. You took your sweet time, Samuels. What's going on? You're losing it a bit. Anyway, here's our guest, Derek. Derek is with us for another ISLA RA, yes. And Derek, what can Samuels grab for you?
Oh, Samuels, can you get me a whiskey, please?
A whiskey man. Same, Derek. Yes, Samuels, the finest whiskey that we have, or that Mark has anyway. Excellent. How do you take it, Derek?
Just straight. Straight.
Excellent. Again, this man does not mess around. Thank you very much, Samuels. Just make that 2. Make it easy. Thank you very much. And please hurry back. Okay, as Samuels,
Samuel.
He's a bit, he's a bit lackadaisical today, Derek. I don't know what's going on. Took his sweet time, but hopefully he doesn't spit in our whiskey.
Hope not.
Anyway, so we were talking about podcasting as well. So Gotham. So you mentioned you guys kicked off with Gotham after losing a bit of timing with Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. and getting that started. A big DC Batman fan. Is that what? Why Gotham? I mean, there were a lot of TV shows, right? That you could choose from.
There were. Yeah, I think Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. was probably number one choice. That was straight there. That was right, exactly where I wanted to watch. But the Christopher Nolan films, I think, have such a special place in John's heart. He's a massive fan of him as a director. And then when Batman and the Batman series came out, John fell in love with all of those movies. And I think what people kind of forget now about Gotham, because it's finished now, after its 5th year, was that there was still a huge amount of positive thoughts around Dark Knight Rises. Still, a lot of people were big fans of that, and it was a massively successful movie. And the announcement of Gotham came very quickly after that movie came out of theaters. I think it might have even been about a month after it came out on DVD. The announcement that this prequel series was coming came out. So both of us were kind of going, right, well, we know a lot about Batman. I've read Batman for years. I would say he's probably my number one DC character, DC main universe character, I suppose. I know more about him than any other DC character, let's put it that way. And John would have been a massive fan of his as well. We have a huge Batman collection. But I think once we started seeing all the people involved in the show and all the people and how they were gearing up to do Gotham as a TV show, once we started seeing that, we were really intrigued in doing the podcast. And I think we did something, I don't know, I don't want to put words in you guys' mouth on ITK. I know you guys love Moon Knight to bits, but I think we did something similar to the way you guys started out your podcast, which was this idea of Moon Knight's eventually going to get a TV series. So let's get in here now and talk about our book and talk about our guy and get people to know who we are and why we're interested in this character. And when eventually the Moon Knight show comes around, which it will, I'm sure it will, or the Moon Knight movie, when it does come around, you guys are number one. You guys are going to be the people that will have all that knowledge and all that backup to be able to talk about the character better than anybody else that tries to do a podcast about it, So that's how we started Gotham TV podcast. We started that in February of 2014, I think. So yeah, 2019 now. So February 2014. The first episode of Gotham premiered for critics late March 2014. So they were still filming the pilot. They hadn't cast some of the main cast for the show before we started doing the podcast. So we were there before some of the first members of the cast for the show were on board. So weekly we talked about our connections. We talked about the books that may be used as the basis of the show and movies that have been out there. We did reviews of the animated movies and all that kind of stuff to build up our knowledge with our audience, effectively, of what we thought was going to happen on the show when it eventually came out. And then we made a really stupid mistake. we got to the release of the first episode, which we saw. We got access to the first episode and recorded our podcast. We went to New York Comic Con and saw the second episode while we were there, and then we came back to Ireland and didn't contact anybody in the PR department for that company. And it took 7 months for Gotham to premiere in Ireland.
No. Because and that's not the first time like it's happened since with shows, right? That's so annoying.
Yeah, absolutely. So we never got our connection with the PR people set up properly. We got access to a lot of interviews with cast over the years from the PR people, which was fabulous, which was really, really good. But because we didn't really know what we were doing to begin with, we didn't get any access to review copies of the show. So we ended off having to go, well, either we illegally downloaded and talk about these shows after illegally downloading them, or we wait until it airs and be the UK and Ireland podcast about this show. What you don't realise is that the show runs out of steam quite quickly. When Gotham started out with something like 12 or 13 million viewers live in the US and dropped down to about 6 million by the end of the first season. And I would guess by the time it came to the UK, a lot of people had already seen it, and weren't watching it live. So we lost a lot of the momentum. We built it back up over the years, but we lost a lot of the momentum by making that decision to not look at it illegally, I suppose. Yeah,
it's certainly it's such a learning process, isn't it? Just like podcasting in general. And I mean, you guys have taken it to another step, trying to sync it and contact the actual shows itself. But yeah, no, you're spot on as well, Derek. I mean, that's kind of one of the reasons as well. Moon Knight, why we chose it as well. It just seemed like a hole that needed to be plugged. That potentially, especially with the rise of the Netflix shows and stuff, it seemed like there was a lot of potential there. But yeah, I mean, obviously we do love the character, and it just seemed like a nice fit. You had Hannibal in between there as well, somewhere, right? Is that?
Yes.
Yeah. And that was that because you both loved that particular show? Because it's not exactly comic book or anything kind of related.
It's not, no. And interestingly, that was our first TV podcast industry show, and our only one for years, the only one that just sat on TV podcast industries. And that was Irene and John, for the most part. They did the third season of Hannibal, so they jumped on board to a show they both absolutely adored and both of them loved talking about. We lived with Irene for a while, many, many years ago, both myself and John, and so we've been long time friends with Irene, and the two of them loved that horror style and that style of that show, Hannibal. So they wanted to do a podcast themselves. So the two of them did that.
Were you a fan as well of Hannibal?
I absolutely adore Hannibal, but I had so much other stuff on my plate at the time that I said it would be really interesting for the two of them to do the podcast together. I think I actually only appeared on the final episode. I think I did the last episode with the two of them. I popped in and popped up with my thoughts, but I love the idea of the two of them doing something a bit more adult and a bit different. John and Irene can get into so much more depth than I can on characters and what the meaning behind everything that's going on is. So I really wanted to hear what they would do in a podcast. They're talking again about John's talking definitely about doing Penny Dreadful, which is another one of his shows that he absolutely loved. That's coming back next year with a new series.
Oh, of course, that's right. Is it called Penny Dreadful as well?
It is. It's Penny Dreadful LA, basically, but that sounds really bad. So I'm trying to think of what the actual extension on the end of Penny Dreadful is. But yeah, that's coming back next year, and John is absolutely dying to talk about that universe and that interesting weird darkness that was in Penny Dreadful. So that's going to be another one of his joints.
Yeah, I think I heard about that somewhere as well. I think that John was keen to do it. I think maybe on Facebook, but because I thought that's interesting because it's over, and you guys don't really do retrospectives.
Absolutely,
you usually do hit the current shows out there. But okay, right. So there is a new one. That's great. Then I do love. Is it John Logan? I think he's a showrunner.
The showrunner, yes.
He's fantastic. So, yeah, okay, keeping my eye out for that.
And I promise I wasn't looking at the internet while I was talking there, but it's City of Angels. It's Penny Dreadful City of Angels, of course, not LA, because that would sound really bad.
City of Angels sounds a lot better, I think. Yeah, so there was Hannibal in there as well, and then as you mentioned, you chose to do a Netflix, the Defenders series. Did you expect it to go for that long as well? Did you expect or just one season for each? Or
well, you know what? I think because of the amount of money that was being pumped in by Netflix, I would have expected it to go, much longer than it actually did.
Oh, okay. Right.
It felt like, at the time, it was kind of the Marvel Cinematic Universe was already taking off quite a bit. Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. had, 22 episodes a year seasons, so it felt like, if you do 5 shows with, 10 to 13 episodes, that's only about 3 seasons of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. effectively, right?
Yeah.
So 39 episodes and 3 seasons of S.H.I.E.L.D. So,
yeah.
It felt like a massive undertaking to go, right, let's jump into this and do all 4 of these shows. Some of the characters, would have been very minor players in comic books that I would have read, and some of them absolutely massive, like Daredevil, having his own movie in the past, that kind of stuff. So I was hoping that we would get a big TV universe, which is what the confidence that they started out with Marvel Netflix, that's what I was really intrigued by. This idea of having 4 shows coming together into a 5th that's massive world building that no other show by that stage had done.
Yeah, it is a shame as well. I mean, it would have kept you guys on your toes as well, like the scheduling wise. One season would end. What was it? You get like 3. Did we get like 3 seasons in one year? Or
we eventually got to 3 seasons in a year.
Yeah, which would keep you guys quiet. I mean, you guys obviously, and through other reasons, I'm sure as well, change your format to try and cater to bring out these reviews, I guess, on time. And some people, again, the people had opinions of it. I really loved the slow burn, actually, Derek, myself. Was it the one episode a week, right? Because you were doing 2 a week by the end of it.
We've moved around a few times, depending on when they happen, because I think the biggest thing for us is trying to make sure that all 3 of us are there. Chris, myself, and John. That's our core group. But it's almost impossible at this age in our lives. We're all in reasonably big jobs and traveling and all that kind of stuff. So sometimes you just can't do it. But we aim for 2 episodes a week for the Marvel Netflix shows. But then they started to kind of run into each other, and then movies came in, and then covering something like Gotham as well, which was 22 episodes a year as well, on top of the 39 that were coming out on Defenders. It's massive,
It is massive.
So at least with Gotham, we kind of had that thing of, right, the episodes air on this day, that means we record this day, and the episodes come out on this day. We had a very specific, it comes out on Thursday nights, we record Friday, and it comes out on Saturday or Sundays, pretty much where we aimed that. But with the Marvel Netflix shows, it got to, as I said, you'd lose half your audience because they'd all watch it on day one, and we'd be very lucky in getting 1 or 2 episodes out on the first day, because sometimes we would get access to the episodes before they came on Netflix. But we get 1 or 2 episodes out, and people would join us and be really intrigued, and then they kind of think, well, nothing that you have said speaks to the end of the series now, so and I'm already done, and off I go. So it's very different kind of podcasting. Yeah,
it's a very difficult thing to try and cater for, because there's so many different variables. As you're saying, people might binge it, people might draw it out, so your audience is all over the place in that regards. And
I think, you said it earlier on, the way you watch your shows is you watch an episode or 2, and then you'll listen to a podcast about an episode or 2.
Yes.
People do that. I think the average Netflix say is like 2.5 episodes is kind of the maximum that most people do. You'll hear tons of people go, I watched the whole season in a day, but the vast majority of people who watch a show is 2.5 episodes, which means you don't actually know where they're going to finish on those. So I know some podcasts. I know one podcast that does an entire season in 1 episode and then never talks about those characters again for another 6 months, and then comes back and does another episode, which I think, I don't know, that's not for me. I know another couple of podcasts who've bunched them up and gone, right, we're going to do these 3 episodes in this podcast, which means you're telling your audience how they should be watching the show.
Yeah, exactly. And that's a really hard thing to kind of to manage and expect of the listeners. I think Luke Cage season 1 was the last season I watched where I was doing what you're saying, like 2 or 3 episodes. I was doing them in a bundle, and then I'd listen to, and then I'd watch another chunk. But obviously, different period of my life now where I've got less time to actually watch TV. So I'm happy to, with the boys, I've like, there've been a few weeks between watching the first and second one. But I do love, what you guys do with the podcast. And I love it because it's like a supplementary, enjoyment along with the show. So you watch a show, you enjoy it for what it is, but there's also another bit to it, which is your podcast, which kind of adds a lot more to it, because you guys, you really do get in there, and you constantly amazed at the amount of analysis, in the best possible way, I'm saying, that you get into the show, and you do kind of really do. I mean, there are so many things I discovered about the shows that I probably wouldn't have picked up, if I hadn't listened to your shows. So, and it just adds a lot more satisfaction to watching the shows. So yeah.
Thanks so much, man. Thank you. No, like we do hear some really nice feedback from our audience, which is great, and I think that's effectively what we wanted to start out when we wanted to start podcasting. That's the real reason. It's not to put our voices out there. It's to kind of connect with a community of people who are like-minded, people that are interested in talking about these shows. We have a couple of rules for how we do our podcast, I suppose, which is a good little bit to throw in here. Really, one of the things we want to avoid, one word that we try to avoid in our podcast is obviously, because it's obvious to me because I've seen the show, and it's obvious to you because you've read 20 or 30 years of comic books, but it may not be obvious to the person that's watched an episode of the show and jumped in and wants to hear people talking about it, So we try to avoid that. Now, from now on, you will always hear the word obviously in our podcast, but we do try to avoid it because we're trying to talk to people about these shows that they obviously love, because why would you seek out a podcast about it if you didn't love the show?
Yeah, no, that's a good rule actually as well, and yeah, you don't want to be kind of... I don't know how the best way to describe it, playing down to your audience by saying, obviously, you should know this, because you
should know this. Why you're exactly the same age as me, and you've spent all of your life reading comic books just like I did.
Yeah,
spent all of your life watching loads of TV shows just like I did. It can't be that way. So,
yeah, exactly.
And then the other rule we have is that everybody that makes a TV show and movie is trying to make the best possible TV show and movie out there.
Yes.
So we try to look at it through the prism of what were they trying to go for here. What was the best possible outcome here, and how can it be fixed in the next episode? I didn't like it now. Could possibly something happen in the next episode that will fix that problem? Because otherwise, you can just tie yourself up in knots trying to criticize something that could actually be fixed next episode.
Oh yeah, there is that. That true. You don't want to fall into that trap. People work really long and hard on these productions, and what I do like about your show as well is obviously you don't. Obviously, I'm saying.
You see, told you.
It's catchy. You don't laud everything just for the sake of lauding stuff. If something is good, it's good. If something is bad, you don't pan it, but you do, let it be known that the episode is a little flat, or I wouldn't defend it, something like, something along those lines. So it's good, honest reviewing as well. And I'd say more often than not, I'd say all the episodes I've listened to, I tend to agree with, nearly all of your summations of the episodes. With some of the episodes in Netflix, they are quite apparent that they are kind of, I don't know, not as good as some of the other ones. So, but there are other more subtle ones as well, which you guys make good cases for and against. I guess that's what I'm saying.
There you go. I think I know exactly what episode you're talking about.
Yeah. We've got Samuel's coming here. Hello, Samuel's. You've got the drinks. Thank you.
Parched, Samuel's parched.
Yeah. This cold weather. Is it cold over there, Derek? Oh, sorry, breaking the illusion. Is it cold across the room there for you?
It's kind of summery over this side of the room. How's it over there?
It's a little cold. That's why I've got a little gas heater next to me, next to the fire.
Right.
Yes, of course. Yeah.
See, that's the thing. It's a split personality library that we're in. Right?
That's it. No, thank you very much, Samuels. That was a decent time. So, yes, you shall be paid this week. Well done. Off you go. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So anyway, Derek, before we get into, we'll get into your books for sure, don't worry, and we'll get out of this mansion. What do you reckon? It's, we need to breathe, and we need to reinvigorate ourselves in a different environment when we talk about your books. But before we do that, just a couple of other things. I wanted to then actually go into rebranding. Well, rebranding, right? Because you were
kind of,
yeah. Was it TV podcast industries before?
So. Kind of to do with doing a show like Hannibal is where we came up with TV Podcast Industries, because Hannibal, as you mentioned, has no connection to anything we were doing before. Everything we were doing had to be based on a comic book, and Hannibal is a very different show for a much more adult audience, I suppose. In a way, obviously loads of adults watch the shows that we are covering, of course, but that's where we wanted to go, is to do a completely different show in a place where we could talk about whatever we wanted to. And then, as you probably know from being in some of our podcast groups, and as some of the listeners may know, as hearing some of the podcast or some of the shows that we have covered over the years, everything collapsed in the last 12 months. We covered Gotham, which finished earlier on this year. After 5 years, we covered all the Netflix Marvel shows. All of them have now been cancelled. So that's kind of the end of an era for all of the shows we've done. So we're kind of brand new, coming back with brand new stuff that we're covering at the moment. So we wanted to get back into having one big bucket to say, right, this is all the stuff that we like, come on board and join us. We're still actually separating out all of the shows into their own individual feeds for people to just pick up whatever shows they want to. But if you want everything that we cover, we have TV Podcast Industries, which is one central location for everything.
It is quite handy. Actually, that's where I've migrated to as well, just because it has everything kind of in there, which is so. When I say that, because I think you guys were doing the Jessica Jones season 3. That was coming out, and then around that time, right? There was the TV Podcast Industries came about. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. We kicked off TV Podcast Industries with a brand new show on there. Yeah,
so I was kind of like, oh, should I still use the Defenders TV Podcast or the TV Podcast Industries? But of course, The Boys was in there, Good Omens as well. Actually, having said that, I may have just revealed some of the things. Why don't you? Could you let the listeners know? So, what sort of shows are you covering now, and maybe actually, what are you planning to cover, apart from, I guess, Penny Dreadful, which was mentioned before, in the future?
Yeah. Well, right now we've just finished our Good Omens podcast, which you mentioned there, Terry Pratchett and Neil Gaiman. I'm a huge Neil Gaiman fan. I think everybody who's sat in this chair in Grant Mansion has mentioned at least one Neil Gaiman book to read if you're a comic book reader. I haven't included any Neil Gaiman in my top 4, and a little spoiler for you, but I'm a massive fan of Neil Gaiman, and to get the opportunity to cover a brilliant adaptation of Good Omens on Amazon Prime earlier on this year was fantastic. So that was one of our first shows just to do on its own on TV Podcast Industries. Did that in association with the Walking Dead cast, which is interesting. That's so just to kind of come full circle on the reason I got into podcasting, and now I'm kind of did a podcast alongside them for Good Omens, which was cool. Then right now we have 2 episodes a week coming out. One episode about The Boys, which comes out every Wednesday, and one episode about Pennyworth, which is the prequel to the prequel. So prequel to Gotham, Pennyworth, which is airing in the US, a 10-episode series as well. So both quite adult shows. Mm-hmm. The Boys is connected to a comic book. Pennyworth is just tangentially connected to the DC universe, but still something that we know. And because of our many years on Gotham, we have a lot of experience with the character of as created by those showrunners, who are the same people that created Pennyworth. So there's kind of lots of stuff going on there, but a lot of work still going into 2 episodes a week now. So.
Oh no, absolutely, and I've a little shout out as well to Chris from your stables with his Chris's Corner. Do you love that? With his
absolutely, yes, in our Boys episodes.
Yeah, given the comic kind of perspective of the Boys, which is good. I really do love it. Truth be told as well, Derek, and look, I've even told told JMD Mateus that as well. Unfortunately, DC is not my strong point as well. So, and unfortunately, I don't watch, many of their shows. So, is Pennyworth any good at the moment? How would you rate it?
Pennyworth is kind of middling right now. We have been lucky enough to get the full series in advance to do our podcast about, which is really cool. I'm really pleased that they've kind of trusted us with that, because it helps us so much to be able to get these episodes and talk about them and watch them. The first 3 episodes are mental, trying to get into this universe, trying to understand what's going on, because it's set in the early 60s and we have a very young Alfred Pennyworth, which we've never really seen. We've seen him on Gotham, but we've never seen a young Alfred Pennyworth going about his business just after he came back from the war. But you realise quite quickly that it's a very different version. It's DC's version of 60s London, so there's some weird stuff going on, which... Yeah, like, people getting executed in the streets, that kind of stuff. So it's it's a very different world than we've seen. So I think it's building up and it's getting better. I think John's been given the ratings of this one. He's been giving them around a 3.5 to a 4 kind of area. We haven't had a 5 yet, but I think there's one coming very soon.
And so who are who's the production, the studio that does Pennyworth?
So weirdly, Pennyworth is it's still produced by Warner Brothers, because they have all the rights for DC.
Of course,
but they created Warner Brothers Horizons, which is a new TV production company. So it's on a TV channel in the US called Epix, which is a really very new channel. It only has only been around for about a year. So they've given full creative control to the guys that run Pennyworth, but the actual people behind it are the same people that kicked off Gotham, Bruno Heller and Danny Cannon. So if you did like Gotham, and there are a lot of us out there, if you did like Gotham, this is going to be interesting to you. A little more adult take, but definitely in the same kind of vein.
Cool, nice one. And speaking of Gotham, Derek, going back to it, just finally as well, this was my attempt at a segue.
I like it.
I just wanted to have a chat with you about the people that you've come across. The creators, the actors. One of the perks of podcasting, I guess, is that you do get to touch base with people that you would have, I guess, admired from a distance. So the first one I'm going to pick, I'll put a list over here in our prompts here, Derek. But Jerome Flynn, that must have been a really cool, and that was actually were you on a stage? You were on a stage, right?
I certainly was. Yes, I certainly was. Yeah.
Were you nervous?
That was I was absolutely up the walls that day. Yeah. I had effectively Walker Stalker Con, which I think has gone to Australia a couple of times. Mm-hmm. They bring on cast members from The Walking Dead and from Game of Thrones quite regularly, right. And from some other shows, but those kind of they're the big two. So I was kind of lucky enough to be asked along to present on that because of my connection with the Walking Dead cast now. Like, again,
cool.
I wouldn't have had that 4 years ago, but they're aware of what I do in the podcast and that kind of stuff. And Jason, who's the host of Walking Dead cast, the two of us have become quite good friends, and he does a lot of the panels at these shows. But they travelled over to London to do one particular show, and it was in the last season now, coming up to Game of Thrones early on this year before the show had finished. When I got the opportunity to interview Jerome Flynn, who was hilarious, and it was on a stage in front of a couple hundred people had gathered round to watch it, which was like really bizarre. You know the feeling. You sit in front of a mic all the time and you record yourself and sometimes edit bits out and fix how you say stuff. But when you're standing in front of 100 people going. And not able to look at notes, of course, because you need to feel feel like you're in control. But he was great. He was really, really lovely guy. I think what he found really weird was about 50% of the people that were at the convention were there because of a TV show that he did many, many years ago. Or not there for him for that TV show, but only remembered him from a TV show he did many, many years ago in the UK, and for a band that he was a singer in.
Oh, he's a singer.
He was a singer in a duo who did a cover version of Unchained Melody that went to number 1 for about 10 weeks, I think, in the UK.
Oh, wow.
So he would have people come up to him about this song that he'd done 20 years ago, not even knowing that he was in Game of Thrones, and just talk to him about that for 10 minutes. And he was talking to me on stage about that, kind of going, if I'd known that all of these people were here and that's all they would remember, I would have brought along the single so I could sign that to give to them.
That's so weird. That would have put him in such a weird headspace. I mean, it's kind of humbling in the fact that they're there not because of his Game of Thrones status, but also he did have some fame before, and so that must have been quite flattering. It would have been, that would have been really good to kind of see that, up close as well. And he does look like a really nice guy. I mean, despite his character in Game of Thrones, he looks like a pretty decent fella.
Absolutely.
Yeah, you mentioned also as well, like with the Walking Dead, the Walking cast. So Charlie Adlard, the artist.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. We got to interview him last week.
Hot off the press
as we're recording now. Yeah. I'm absolutely fascinated. I'm a massive Walking Dead fan, particularly of the comic books. And Charlie Adlard's been the artist on the book since about issue 7, so almost from the beginning of the series.
Okay, I thought he did all of them, but I mean, like, that's a monumental task.
Yeah.
Do you know other stuff he's done, just incidentally?
He has been so focused on this book. We go into it a little bit on the podcast itself, on the interview itself, but he's been so focused on the amount of work that he puts into Walking Dead that it's only really in the last year that his time was freed up a little bit to do some other stuff, and some of that's only coming out now. Interestingly, he's done a lot of stuff in French comic books, which is a kind of a completely side thing that I'm not hugely aware of. I'm very much the big two and some of the kind of subsidiaries of DC and Marvel, but there's a lot of French comic books that are that sit completely outside of that, and he's been involved in doing a bunch of those over the last year or so. Has a lot of them coming out at the moment, but it's actually, like, genuinely his career has been predominantly Walking Dead for 15, 16 years.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, he is a phenomenal artist, and it's, actually, that's one of the good things I find. I mean, I'm not as big a Walking Dead fan as you, Derek. I've got the compendium, so I've got like the first 48 issues or so, but to have that consistency in artwork all the way through and in writing for such a long time. The Walking Dead comic just wrapped up not that long ago. What number did it get up to? Sorry, I don't have it with me.
Well, that's probably one of the most interesting things, because it came out of nowhere. It was issue 193, so not an issue that anybody would have thought would have been the end of the book. So a lovely surprise for everybody. Really, they did a great job of just surprising everybody with this issue. They'd drawn 3 covers for what could have been the next 3 issues, which would have completed a final compendium, I think. I think that would have been the numbering. 196, I think, would have finished a compendium. So they did that so that it would look like they were going to be putting out more books for the next couple of months, and then just dropped this. And it was only because retailers started to open it and started to read it the night before it was actually released on shelves that people were aware that it was the final issue. So there was quite a few people that that read the last issue not knowing it was the final one until they got a couple of pages in, So
continually surprising the audience and the readers. That's one of the great things about Walking Dead for me, so similar with Game of Thrones, is that how anything could just turn all of a sudden, and it's that huge shock that synonymous with Walking Dead and Game of Thrones. Also, as well, so you met up with a lot of the cast and crew of Gotham?
Yes, yeah. Over the years, I mentioned earlier on about going to New York for New York Comic Con.
I remember the photos.
Yeah. Myself and John went luckily to New York Comic Con a couple of years in a row. But the first year we went was specifically because Gotham was coming out, and we were going, look, why not have a holiday and spend a week in New York? Hey, it's awesome, and it happens to be the week that New York Comic Con's on, so we'll get tickets for that, and off we go. So that was totally the plan. We planned it months in advance to go along to this massive event, which is now, like, you can't get tickets for Hell High Water. There's not a chance. But we specifically planned to go over, have a holiday, see New York, and just spend this weekend, this 4 days at the event. But we contacted the PR team before we went over, said who we were. They were aware of us, weirdly, because they have to be aware of everything when they're launching a new show. And they basically said, come on into the press room and meet the cast in there.
That's so cool.
So we were really lucky, and I'm quite pushy, I realised after a little bit of time doing this stuff. I'm quite pushy with my voice, and my voice does stand out quite well in a large room of Americans talking to actors. So
good.
It's really good. I'm very lucky in that, because we have effectively the interviews that you do with these cast members is a round table of 4 or 5 members of press. I'm talking. I think at our table on the first one, I think we had like a person from the New York Times, was at the table with us, and then there was another blogger at the table and another quite big variety magazine or some other big magazine, but my voice came across quite well, so people were letting me ask questions a bit more when cast members were coming up. And one of the most interesting people, one of the people that I knew before the show started, was Sean Pertwee, who's the son of one of the doctors, John Pertwee. Sean Pertwee's on the show. He plays Alfred on the show, interestingly. But at the end of our round table, when we'd done all the interview and he was walking off, he pointed over to me and came around the table and said, "I'd love to be on your podcast. I've heard about it from the PR guys. Get in contact with my person and we'll do an interview later on in the year." So he was our way in. And once he'd been on, a couple of the members of the cast were really interested in coming on board. But that's
cool.
where it all came from.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
That's so great. That's great. I mean, because, like, you know, that's another level, isn't it? I mean, you're actually rubbing shoulders with the people that are actually there doing the stuff, you know, creating the stuff that you're actually reviewing, which is, and for them to come over to you and say, "Look, I'm happy to do it." I mean, that'd be so gratifying, I reckon.
It was absolutely one of those weird moments where you go, maybe we are doing something right here.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, that's all it is. You know, we've had this conversation, and I'll share it with the loony listeners. Why not? We've had this conversation, which is literally, you know, we are a podcast. We're talking about TV shows. If the cast want to come on board and have an interview with us, we're perfectly happy doing an interview with them. But we certainly aren't becoming friends with these people, and they're not becoming friends with us. It's absolutely a conversation between us about the TV show. You know, that's where it is. That, you know, I'm always fascinated to hear anybody that is interested in hearing our show. We constantly call out to people to record their voices and send it in to us as feedback. We want to hear loads of different voices, and if it happens to be a cast member from the show, awesome. That's absolutely great. I've always liked talking to other people, and I love having people on the shows to talk about their work and talk about, you know, the things that they've done. We've had cast members from Gotham who've done 2 episodes of the show who are absolutely fascinating to talk to, and just as fascinating to talk to as people that are on every single episode. You know, so
yeah, I mean, it just really depends on, you know, what stories you can tell and what you can bring as well. And that's great. I mean, also as well, very much the same with what we're doing. It just love to get other, you know, as many different voices as we can and chat with people. Yeah. You know, I love chatting about stuff that I'm interested in. You know, getting the likes of yourselves and you know, Chris and other podcasters, as well as being fortunate enough to have interviewed a couple of writers and stuff. It's been just so fun, hasn't it? It's like it's great. It's such a strange thing, but at the end of the day, it's you can get the best stories just from, you know, I don't know, just like the loonies or you know, it all depends on, you know, what you ask, what you can give. Yeah.
But that's it. Like, I want to hear, you know, I want to hear the opinions of everybody that works behind the show. I'd love to interview every single person who's ever been on any of the shows that we've covered, because I want to know what they were thinking about when they were going into that scene, or if they were directing it, what they were aiming at. You know, we had one of my absolute favourite interviews that we did was having Chiohadari Coker, who was the showrunner for Luke Cage, who contacted me by direct message on Twitter and said, "We've been listening to your podcast. I'd love to come on if you'd be interested in having me on." And we had a list of about 100 questions to ask Chio Coker. Yeah. I think I got 2 questions in that I had planned in advance, and he talked for 2 hours about his entire career and everything, all of Luke Cage and all that, everything that he was involved in, and he was fascinating. I absolutely loved it. I would love to have someone just talking like that. It's great.
Oh, absolutely. You could tell he's a passionate guy. Like, I mean, I follow him on Twitter as well, and I could totally see him just jumping to be listening to your podcast avidly, because it seemed like he immersed himself in as showrunner for Luke Cage, rightly so, because what a gig, you know. So I can just imagine him just you know, absorbing all the comics, you know, looking at the podcasts and stuff, and yeah, that was such a cool interview.
I loved it, and we left our camera on at the beginning of it by mistake. We just called him from camera on Skype, and he turned on his camera and just sat there talking to us over camera phone for the 2 hours, which was cool.
Yeah, you make mention of his, was it his shirt?
Yeah.
He was wearing, so yeah, I had the sense that you guys were videoing.
Yeah, I think the famous story from him about his reviews that he's done is that after the first episode of first season of Luke Cage dropped, he got in contact with someone who'd reviewed every episode and asked them to give feedback to him. So he responded to someone who had done a review of episode by episode of Luke Cage season 1 and kind of went, this is our template of how we're going to do a better season 2 of the show, because this is what somebody thinks we did wrong in season 1. So that's his famous story. So yeah, good guy.
Well, and you can see that with that kind of almost a love letter to the fans with the Power Man and Iron Fist team up in season 2, which was so awesome. And that was, dare I say, obviously a reaction to fans wanting it. And also it was really great to see. And I think he nailed it as well, the relationship between the two, how they kind of worked together, how they kind of fought together. Brilliant stuff. Yeah. Anyway, Derek, thank you so much for sharing all about your introduction into comics, as well as podcasting, as well as the great people that you've met as well. And now I think it's time that we fly off to look at your top 4 ISLA RA books. So what say I give Khonshu a bell, and I think he will drop us into an appropriate locale. Are you? Have you got your coat with you?
Oh yes. Just hang up over here. Let me go get it. Yep, let's go.
Yep. Excellent. All right, we'll be right back, loonies, to look at Derek's ranked 3rd and 4th ISLA RA books. Catch you soon.
Hello, I'm Anthony.
And I'm Dr. Issues.
And we're hosts of Capes on the Couch, the podcast where comics get counseling.
Superheroes don't always get to go home happy. That's where we come in.
We offer psychiatric and mental health analysis of comic book characters.
So check us out at capesonthecouch.live and across all social media platforms at Capes on the Couch.
We Are Venomaniacs is the Venom Site official podcast for all of your symbiote news, reviews, and point of views about Venom-related comics, movies, television, animation, and merchandise. We are available on Podbean, Spotify, Apple Music, iTunes, Google Play Music, and YouTube. Join us, won't you?
Yes, welcome back, loony listeners. You are listening to Into the Night, a Moon Knight podcast. This is an ISLA RA Sessions, and we have a very special guest, Derek O'Neill from TV Podcast Industries. Now, Derek, there's a bit of an echo here, and again, look, I wasn't happy with Samuels. I'm not happy with Khonshu. Apologies for the location that we've dropped. It's a bit cold. I'm glad you got your coat. Yeah, are you okay with this? We are in West Georgia Correctional Facility. I really don't know why we are here. Well, I probably can tell from.
I have a feeling why.
So we're going to look at one of your first books, Derek, ranked in at number 4 from your top 4. I need some special effects of choo, choo, choo. Number 4. Fourth book. We happy to reveal Walking Dead, issue 19. No surprises here, Derek.
Yes.
Yeah, so this is written by Robert Kirkman, art by Charlie Adlard, which we were just talking about previously. Now we are in the correctional facility because... Derek, why don't... can I ask you to maybe give a brief summary of the rundown for this issue?
Yes, absolutely. Yes, this issue takes place at the start of chapter 4 of The Walking Dead. So we're into the second half, I suppose, of the story where Rick and his team are trying to take the prison, which people will remember from the TV show. There's a big reason why I love this issue, though, because we have our first introduction to the character of Michonne.
Yeah. Straight off the bat, page 1, right, isn't it? Yep. I thought, actually, when I opened this up, Derek, issue 90, I thought that was probably a little to do with Michonne for you. I don't know why. Is she a fan? Is she a character favourite of yours in Walking Dead?
She is my absolute favourite. One of my prized possessions is an original page from an early issue. It's not, unfortunately, this issue, but an early issue of The Walking Dead with Michonne and her wonderful katana. So So I have an original piece of artwork from this. But this book, it just came out of nowhere, this character of Michonne. You know, we had a lot of very realistic storytelling early on. What would happen if the world went to crap is the whole premise of The Walking Dead. When the zombies rise, normal humans have to deal with it. And then we had Michonne walk in with two zombies tied to the back of her shoulders, keeping other zombies away while she cut them in half with her katana. And it just felt like a brand new breath of fresh air to this book, before it even needed a breath of fresh air. So,
yeah, it's for me, because I'd watched the TV series before, reading the comic book issues as well, and she had the same effect in the show. I thought she just seemed so deadly, you know, and a little mysterious, very capable, you know, of handling herself. And there was that kind of the mystery dangling with those two zombies at the back. I remember, this is weird, you know, seeing in the TV show. And I mean, obviously assumed it was to do with a deterrent for zombies. Yes. But there's a lot in this issue, Derek. Look, rereading this, so as you mentioned, it was the correctional facility. It's the introduction of Michonne. There's a bit of a power play happening in the prison there with is it Dexter?
Dexter, yes.
Yeah, and they've kind of looted the armory, and they've got weapons now. And there's a very tense moment. Of course, the horde of zombies come. It was good to see Otis in there as well. I remember him because it's been such a long time since I've watched a TV show and read this as well. Otis in the TV show, was he the dude that was left behind by John Bernthal? Is that right?
Exactly.
Yeah, okay. It's slightly different, I think, in the comics. I think he's portrayed slightly different, or anyway.
Yeah, very, very much. I think at the time when the TV show was going on, they very much were saying, right, we're gonna slow it right down, and we're not going to tell issue by issue on the TV show, and we're also going to change things up so that people are going to be surprised even if they did read the comic. Because realistically, the Walking Dead comic has probably been one of the highest selling comic books put together, you know, of all time. It seems to be in the top 10 every time they release an issue, even though it's not from the big two books. You know, that's quite a massive achievement over the years, you know.
No, it's phenomenal
phenomenal.
that this is, yeah, exactly.
So they knew people would know every character. They knew that if they put a character on screen, it was going to get a big reaction from comic book readers at the time anyway. So they would change up things with some of the minor characters. You know, there's characters that died on the TV show back in season 2 who were still alive right up until the end of the book. You know, so it's always interesting when that stuff happens. But the introduction to Michonne, I think, was specifically built for comic readers, because I think it came right at the end of either a half season or a season, to get people back for the next season, basically. So because it was like, who's this woman? Go out and buy the comics, and you'll be able to read it during the summer while we're on a break, kind of thing. So,
yeah.
Yeah.
And she has that kind of, you know, she's got that good balance of being very comic booky looking. Like, you know, she's got the swords, she's got the zombies at the back, she's got, you know, killer dreads happening. But also, you know, she doesn't look hammy in the TV show at all. Like, she still looks very grounded in it. So immediately recognisable from the comic book fans, I guess is what I'm saying. And that would have got, you know, raised a few eyebrows.
Absolutely.
So also as well. So the main choice for this, Derek, was Michonne as well. I found one of the biggest things here that happened to me after rereading it this afternoon was Rick shooting Dexter. I mean,
yeah.
That's the big play, I think, in this issue here, and it kind of resonates a bit, and it is kind of a culmination as well of what has been building up, just from memory from the issues. But yeah, I mean, how do you see Rick? Is he one of your faves apart from Michonne? Is he a good leader? He's very flawed.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think that's what makes him so fascinating to read. in the books. I'm very much a story-driven reader of comic books. It was fascinating in the interview we did with Charlie Adlard, where he does describe The Walking Dead as being a 50% book, 50% the writing and 50% the artwork, because he does do a significant amount. You can see it even in this book here. He does a significant amount with how the characters are seen in the pages. But Kirkman's writing for a character like Rick, he's a central character, but he does a great job of filling out the rest of the world around him as well. And he does a great job of him not being the Captain America of the Walking Dead universe. You don't need that. You need a real person who makes mistakes sometimes and then tries to build on them and tries to correct them. That's what made it so interesting to read as a comic book, I think. So while Rick's not one of my favourites as a character, I think he's still one of the best characters in comic book history because of what he does and the choices he makes and what they lead to for so many of the other characters around him. And the fact that people still continually seem to trust him as being their leader, and he stands up to every challenge, is probably what makes him so interesting.
He does. I mean, again, and I haven't read as thorough Walking Dead or actually watched some of the... I think I'm still only up to like season 7 or so. But this thing of Rick obviously having to do the stuff that no one else will, but also at the same time, and being a good leader in that sense, but also at the same time, there is a level of fear that, people would have of him, similar to like Negan, right? He was so successful as a leader, but he ruled with a lot of fear, which was a lot less so than Rick does that a lot less so than Negan, but yeah, they're massively flawed, as you say, but very compelling to actually read. So this was your number 4 pick here, a very solid issue, number 19. Do you remember, so where does this head towards? We're heading, again, going off my TV show knowledge, the Governor should show up soon, shouldn't he? Yeah. Yes,
absolutely. He shows up very, very soon. I think it's by issue 22, I think we have the Governor in the book. Might even be issue 21. It's very much this whole concept that may have come across or may not have in the TV show. It's writ large in the comic book. If you find a place that everybody wants, well, everybody wants it. So you will find other people coming after you to take it back from you because it's a really solid place that they found here.
I remember the TV show like going, this stay here forever. I mean, like, you are well set up here. But I mean, obviously that it showed later on that wasn't the case with the Governor. Did he have a tank? He had a tank, didn't he, in the TV show?
He brought the tank. Yeah, he absolutely brought the tank.
And there was that scene as well, I think it was, again, Herschel, that's it. He had quite a horrific death scene there at the hands of the Governor, there from memory.
That's right. Again, didn't die in the comic books there, but Rick did lose his hand. Rick did lose his hand there.
That's what I was about to say as well. It's so weird, isn't it? One of the things that when I was reading this comic, damn, like Rick lost his hand so early on, compared to the TV show. And I know that there's very much differences between the two, but that's a big thing. So all the way up to, again, no spoilers, Derek, all the way up to 193. I'm assuming Rick's hasn't got a bionic hand or anything like that.
He does have a replacement hand, but it doesn't really do much. It doesn't really do much. It's a replacement hand. But I do remember the Robert Kirkman saying that was the one thing he regretted. Once he cut off Rick's hand, it just kind of restricted the character. And interestingly, Charlie Adler, one of those covers I was talking about earlier on that he drew for the later issues, one of those covers has a character that looks very, very like Rick Grimes, but he's holding a gun in the right hand that he lost in issue 22. So I think that was a little reward for him to get to draw Rick holding a gun in his right hand.
That's cool. That's cool. Yes, I will. I mean, that was number 4, Walking... Oh, did you hear that, Derek?
No.
I'm not sure if you heard that sound in the distance. I'm not sure we're entirely alone here in this facility. Have you got your shotgun with you? During the break, we forgot to mention Derek heavily armed himself. I don't know why, but anyway, Derek has got a shotgun and an axe, which is not unlike Rick. So please have them at the ready Derek, I thought I heard something. So I'm not too happy to stay here too long. We do have your number 3 book though, and your number 3 book is Original Sin, number 6. Now this is 6 of 8, and this was written by Jason Aaron and art by Mike Diodato Jr. So hang on, let me crack this one open as well. So first off the bat, why did you choose this issue? I think there's one reason at least why.
there is one. The variant cover has Moon Knight on the cover.
Of course, that's it. Yes.
I was trying to find my digital copy of this, and I have every issue of the Original Sin run. I was trying to find my digital copy of this issue because I know it was my favourite of all the issues. And I went on to Comixology, and I couldn't find them in the regular run, and I found out I bought the extended edition, the full edition, which has like 40 pages of awesome Mike Diodato artwork.
Nice.
All of his covers, all the pencil work that he did. It's magnificent, and I love this book.
His art is brilliant.
It's beautiful, and Jason Aaron, he's a writer that I love. Many things that he's done, but can I reveal the reason why?
Yeah, sure.
Why this is my book? Because this is one of the best appearances of Nick Fury that's been out there, really. There you go.
Yeah, I had an inkling because when I was reading this was a damn good read, and it does. There's a big juicy role here for Nick, isn't there?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think you guys, as Mooney fans, will probably recognise this tendency that Marvel have to give a book to someone who has an idea of what they want to write with your character, like Moon Knight, and Nick Fury had this on many occasions, and then they drop it all and then restart it or reboot it or give you a new story with the character. I think how he was used in Original Sin, where they finally showed old man Nick Fury for the first time, which is what we see here. This is the issue that kind of reveals what Nick Fury has actually been doing for the Marvel Universe for the entirety of his career, which is so fascinating, really interesting.
It is really good. It's and in this particular issue, he basically is looking for a replacement, right?
Exactly.
Which we get later on.
Yeah, so let's set up Original Sin a little bit. As a book itself, it's effectively that the Watcher, who's been watching over the world, has lost one of his eyes, has been killed, and his eyes have been taken from him, and his eyes reveal to all of the Marvel Universe all the secrets they've been keeping back, which is a fascinating twist for all of those things that people didn't know are suddenly revealed to the world, which is fab.
Really, really great, and a great way to actually go into all the individual titles and to create these cool stories, like all tied in with them having their deepest, darkest secrets kind of revealed. Yeah,
exactly. Nick's involved because he is trying to solve the murder, as are all of the heroes. They're all trying to find out who released this and who's the one that killed the Watcher. But we find out that Nick has been serving this purpose where he effectively chooses what battles everybody fights, because he's been the one blocking the other battles from ever reaching Earth. He's the Watcher on the wall, and he's getting so old that he needs a replacement for him. So this issue 6, is effectively where everybody finds out Nick's purpose and what he's done, which is just I love the idea of the entirety of all of the Marvel heroes not knowing what was going on behind everything, and that kind of seems to be the position of Nick Fury on many occasions. Throughout his history has always been this guy that's the shadowy figure in the background pulling the strings. But this one, I think, particularly just worked really well.
Oh, no, absolutely. And very smartly constructed, I think, by Jason Aaron. A nice take on Nick. And it actually, it explains a lot of things, like, actually where he is. You get a lot of the LMDs as well, which come to cover for him. I mean, that's part and parcel with Nick Fury anyway.
Yeah, absolutely.
But, obviously to see the real dude, the real guy there, what he's doing, I'm glad that, I'm glad the likes of Moon Knight's there to see it. It's funny, as you mentioned as well, Jarek, and, this is nothing to take away from the issue, but, Moon Knight in a very small role, could have had him do more. No,
absolutely.
Anyway, that's just Ant-Man's there, which is pretty cool.
Gives Nick a good punch in the face.
Punisher, yeah.
Doctor Strange in there. Everybody's in there, and it's kind of one of those wonderful reveals, as I say, that nobody in the Marvel Universe at all has known that Nick's been doing this for 50, 60 years at this stage, which I really like, because everybody thinks that Nick's on their side. Everybody that's worked with S.H.I.E.L.D. over the years thinks they know what Nick's all about, and I like this idea that he has been hiding something quite significant from all of them.
Yeah. And there's a moment in here, actually, which is, I think, quite telling. It's just on one page with Nick being greeted by Uatu, the Watcher, and it's almost like as if he's the Grim Reaper, because Nick's dying, but he chooses not to, because he knows that Uatu is watching him, because it's a significant moment, obviously, in the universe. So Nick's about to cark it, but he perseveres, and he has to have this thing done. So, very well written. I'd suggest anyone to read the original. I recently picked up all the floppies, Derek, of all the tie-ins. I've went a bit crazy.
Oh yeah.
So I haven't read them yet. So like the All New Invaders, stuff like that. I think it was Guardians of the Galaxy, the Fantastic Four issues, all the kind of peripheral titles that were connected to it. I wanted to actually, read the whole thing, because it is a good read, Looney. So if you haven't read it, there's a little bit of Moon Knight in there, but this is a really good tale of Nick Fury and what happens. Oh look, spoilers, right? It's been gone for a while, so
yeah.
Who does replace the Nick Fury as a Watcher on the Wall there, Derek? I know, I'm just...
I love the choice. It is Bucky. Nathaniel Barnes takes his rightful place as the man on the wall. Yeah, it's really interesting. I think we'll probably get into a little tiny bit more. I promise I won't constantly talk about this, but we'll get into a little tiny bit more. But it's interesting that always over the history of Nick Fury, he's been connected with Captain America and Bucky Barnes quite significantly over the years, because they were the only people really that were in the war and are still around. Human Torch, that version of Human Torch hasn't been around very much, but those two characters played a significant role in his history, and he's kind of tied to them. So I love the choice of passing this on to Bucky at the end.
And he does seem quite suited for it, very capable for it. So, yeah. So what did you think of? There was also the other play with the villains. Was it Midas?
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, and actually, I'm reminded also here, Derek. Sorry, I've gone off on a tangent here. Remember AR? So this comic had the old the augmented reality that Marvel was experimenting with. I thought it was pretty fun.
Yeah, I love this idea. I really enjoyed it. Unfortunately, I don't buy physical comics as often as I used to, because I don't have a local comic shop, unfortunately, anymore. So it's something that you kind of miss out on. But I really love this idea of having the artist tell you how they drew the page and starting from scratch. So I suppose this is why this digital copy of the book has so much additional material, because it had the AR as well. So.
Yeah, I reckon they should do more of it. It was very good. I really did enjoy it. You flash your phone over it and you get extra information. It was really good. There's a bit of noise, a bit of ruckus here, Derek.
Can we get out of here?
I think we probably better head. Oh, hang on. Yep, thanks for that, Derek. Yes, Derek is shooting off a few what do you call a buckshot? Let's get out of here. We've got 2 more books to talk about for Derek's ISLA RA books. We're going to go to a break, and we'll be right back.
I am Connor from the House of L.
And I am Ray from the House of Zod.
We are 2 of the many survivors of Krypton's destruction, and we have made our home in Australia, and dare I say have become Australians, for better or worse. But we have also decided to read Superman comics, read Superman books, watch Superman shows, cartoons, movies, basically everything Superman, and from an Australian perspective as well. Whether you're a seasoned fan, like me,
or whether you are coming in fresh, wide-eyed and wanting to learn more like me, then this podcast is for you. Join us for our bi-weekly adventures, available on all good podcast catchers.
So just search for Last Sons of Krypton, a Superman podcast. We'll be coming to you from Australia or some cosmic dimension, wherever we are that week. Up,
and away.
The swamp, more than merely a place. It is a churning, seething, bubbling bed of life, of which you are a part. Once you were a man, a chemist named Ted Salas, until one little experiment went somewhat awry. And you changed. The serum that was to have made you a super soldier, combined with the strange forces in the swamp, to make you over into this, a shambling, mindless mockery of your former humanity. The macabre Man-Thing. Man-Thing was created in the early 1970s to capitalize on the growing monster craze, but under writer Steve Gerber it became something quite different. Experimental, surreal, and very, very weird. It was something I loved as a kid, but does it still hold up today, 4 decades after its initial publication? So join me, Paul Matthew Carr, as I attempt to make sense of this cult classic and analyze each issue, putting it in the context of the time it was written and comparing it to the standards of today. And maybe you too can come to love the world's second most famous swamp-based comic book character as much as I do. The Nexus of All Realities, a Man-Thing podcast, a twice-monthly dive into the bizarre.
Yes, welcome back, loony listeners. Really, again, apologies. Khonshu, look, he dropped us in the middle of a correctional facility surrounded by zombies. We have Samuel's taking too long for our drinks. Look, now though, it seems to be he's come up with the goods. We're on board the Shield helicarrier.
This seems a lot safer than being on the ground when the zombies are around.
Yeah, exactly. I saw the wing. The wing was invisible. That's great.
That's all right.
We're up here in the clouds. We're flying due east. I don't know. It's where the sun is. The sun is on my left. Okay. And we're looking at your top 2 Desert Island books. So Derek, if you're stuck on the Isle of Ra, right? Okay, you've got nothing but coconuts, a bit of fish, maybe a bit of shellfish to eat.
Nice.
You have Walking Dead issue 19 with you. That's check. That's in your pocket. You've got Original Sin issue 6 of 8 with you. Check. That's good. And the rest of the story that is good. You've got a nice story told there of Nick Fury, and you have the introduction of Michonne. We've got your number 2 book here, and this is Gotham Central, issue 10 by Greg Rucka and Michael Lark. Now, this was a ripper of a read.
This is a good issue, isn't it? This came along as a shock for us. So Gotham Central as a book is effectively, what do the cops in the GCPD do? That's the whole premise of the book, and I love the concept of it. You might understand from a conversation we had earlier on about Gotham TV podcast that this came to us a bit late. This book was written back in 2003, and when the main actor in the role of Jim Gordon was cast, Ben McKenzie, when he was cast, he posted on Twitter, "These are the books that I've been given to read to give me some kind of insight to what Gotham's going to be like," and one of the books was Gotham Central. So we read and reviewed every issue of Gotham Central. There was only 24, I think, issues of the book printed. So it's a short enough series of books. But the story that absolutely jumped out to me when reading it was a story called Half a Life. It's a 4-issue arc within the series about the characters of Renee Montoya. Would be probably a reasonably well-known character in comic books, but in these issues she is just simply a GCPD officer on the beat who's being targeted by Two-Face, a big Batman villain who I think most people would be aware of. But I think this issue we're talking about, issue 10, is the Gotham Central issue that kind of finishes the arc. And as I've mentioned earlier on, right, it's always difficult choosing one issue of a book, especially with a big reveal, I suppose, that's going on. But I think the issue itself was quite well handled. Effectively, you've got a supervillain here who is kind of in love with Renee Montoya, and he's pushing her to be in a relationship with him, even though she's a lesbian. And there's a really interesting part of this story here where she tells him, I can never be in love with you, I'm a lesbian. And he kind of goes, well, I'll just make sure that nobody else will want you and you'll have to come to me. Because Two-Face is crazy. And that's kind of I like the take on him here, because they're absolutely showing that he lives his life by flicking a coin, and whatever path he's being told to take, that's the path he takes. So that's kind of where we are with Half a Life, and I really do enjoy the storytelling in here. Greg Rucka is a really interesting writer. I've read quite a few of his books after this, but this was kind of my first introduction to him as someone to pay attention to.
Okay, yeah, it's a very solid issue. Look, did Two-Face, did he have did he admire Montoya from a distance previously and such, or?
There is an issue earlier on in one of the Batman books where they had a connection, they had a conversation kind of thing. So this is a follow-on from a previous story that they'd had. But I suppose one of the pleasures of reading Gotham Central is, something that would take place in a panel or two of a Batman comic book. Gotham Central really spun that into what actually happens when these characters go home at night. The kind of idea of maybe Harvey Bullock has a more complex life behind him being, a drunk GCPD officer who takes bribes. Maybe there's something more complicated behind that character, and they started looking at those kind of characters. There's so many people in here that ended off being in the Gotham TV show at the beginning and then fell out when they turned it into the show about the villains as opposed to the GCPD. So this was a really good instructional kind of issue to find out what was going on with these characters in the minds of the writers before they cracked what they wanted to do with the TV show. So, yeah,
I think this is a really intriguing, nice little perspective of telling a tale, and it makes total sense now, Derek. The tie-ins with Gotham, the TV show. Yeah. When you gave me the list of 4, I just thought, okay, well, this is. I knew you were a Batman fan. I thought, well, this is just a nice steady read for you. It's pretty cool. Incidentally, as well, Derek, one of our previous guests, David Finn from Signal of Doom, he reminded me that he had this very issue as his honourable mention as well in his ISLA RA book. So I didn't make the top 4, but he wanted to mention it. So it's and I've been told by other people, go read Gotham Central. So I like this idea about it's concentrating on the other characters, and Batman. Although he makes an appearance here, it's only very fleeting.
It is, and I suppose this is the 4th issue of the 4-issue arc, I suppose. So there's a great moment where they realise, actually, in this particular issue, and Batman's not supposed to be around at all for the whole series, but in this particular issue they realise he's actually been taking the form of somebody else in the GCPD. He's been doing an impression of them, effectively, because nobody knows what Batman looks like, effectively. So I love that he's kind of had been impersonating somebody earlier on in the books, and then at the end he wants the GCPD to get the collar. He wants them to arrest Two-Face, so he shows himself effectively as Batman. So it's a nice touch.
Is that that was something I never knew before? Is that something that he usually does? Like, can he impersonate people, rather well?
I have never seen much instances of it. Very much, I suppose the Batman persona has always been that he strikes fear into the heart of the criminal. So when he wears his Batman outfit, that's what he's doing. Is he's not just punishing a criminal, he's making sure they're afraid that they're going to get caught by him again, or he's going to be the one to find them. So that's the whole persona of Batman. But absolutely, he's a detective. He is he has used the ability to hide himself. I think, if I remember right, Batman Year 1 would have been before he becomes Batman. He absolutely dresses up in different rags and different outfits within that to build up information about people around him, but it's not often used.
No, not at all. And look, mention has to be made of the artwork here as well. Michael Lark.
Yeah.
I'm trying to figure out where I've seen his artwork. I love his artwork. It might have been Hawkeye or something. There was some Marvel title, which might have even been Daredevil, I think. But his art is, it just works really well with the colours here and the inking, like a lot of shadows.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think that's part of the pleasure of this book. It is a book that's written by 3 people. I think they're the only 3 people involved, 2 artists and Greg Rucka, from the beginning. So it's another book that it is the vision of these people brought to life over the course of the book. And I love the artwork in this. There's some great moments. I think I've mentioned about Rena Montoya being a lesbian, and it's only in this book that she comes out to her family, and I think it's a wonderfully handled scene because so often...
was so good, yeah.
It's just so often in these books you do have a character coming out to their family, and then it's, oh, that's fine, we knew, kind of thing. And that's not the case for everybody, to have this here, where she does have her partner Dee waiting for her while she tells her parents, and her parents turn their back on her and say, don't ever come back home. But she has her partner there with her.
And it's so well done as well. Again, like we have a little bit of a silent comic happening when Montoya goes up to the apartment, and it just is Dee kind of waiting for her, and then you can see silhouettes of Montoya and her parents just talking up in the apartment above. Dee's just sitting on the hood of a car. Just waiting, and it just ends the next page with just 8 even panels of basically Montoya telling her what's happened up there, and you're seeing a very what I saw, Derek, was essentially a very strong character in Montoya. Not to say that she's not strong at the end, but you see her vulnerability at the end.
Absolutely, and again, it's probably the balance of the relationship between the two of them is what comes across so well. Dee is a more of a minor character in the book, and Rena Montoya has broken out and has become quite a big character in the DC world. After these issues, she does become a bit of a superhero in herself. She's been seen in TV shows and movies in the past as well, so she is a character that people do know. But this moment here is effectively saying that herself and Dee are in such a strong relationship that she can break down and Dee can take care of her. The final lines of the issue with "I've got you" is what their relationship's all about, and I think it's really important to see that side of things as well. I think this is just why the issue is such a good one. Yeah, no,
it certainly is. It's probably a silly question, Derek. Montoya, so she's in Gotham, the TV show?
She was in the first season, and in fact, the actress who played her, Victoria Cartagena, was our first ever interview on a podcast. She came on our sixth episode, I think, or 7th episode.
Oh wow, cool!
We got to interview her, and we actually got to interview her twice that year. And then her character was unfortunately removed from the TV show. They decided to go a different way, and she didn't come back for the second half of season 1. So
she's such a big character.
Yeah, but I think that's one of the things you'll probably know, even in some kind of peripheral knowledge of Gotham, that it started out as a cops and robbers TV show.
And then you said it's gone into
became the villain comic book TV show. Yep. Nothing wrong with either of those things, but once they did that, it changed away from this idea of Gotham Central. But this gives you a great idea of what Gotham could have been on TV. It's not for the mainstream. It's not for a massive budget TV show, of course. But this was always really intriguing.
Yeah, fantastic work here. That was your second. Derek, have you shined your shoes? Just let me comb my hair here. I think we see Nick Fury's coming our way. Hello, Nick.
About damn time.
How are you? Yes, Khonshu brought us on board the heli character. Carrie. I'm stumbling in front of you, Nick. It's an honour. It's a pleasure to meet you.
This Nick Fury Jr. right here in front of us on the helicar.
Yeah.
That's
amazing. How cool is that?
I got my eye on you,
Nick. We've just changed our name recently. We used to be called Defenders TV Podcast, and we're now TV Podcast Industry. But everybody keeps calling us by our old name. Is there any advice you can give us about this new name change to TV Podcast Industry? I know you changed from Marcus Johnson to Nick Fury Jr. How did you get people to kind of stop dealing with you as Nick Fury?
You become part of a bigger universe. You just don't know it yet.
Right.
Wow, Nick, that's very profound.
Yeah, absolutely.
Derek, I think we've got to kind of wrap that up in a bow and put it somewhere very special.
Very
Nick,
important.
your words just astound us, astound me, astound Derek, astound the world.
Speechless.
Yeah, Nick, look, while I'm here as well, I just wanted to ask you, why hasn't Moon Knight ever been featured on screen? I mean, you've got ABC's Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. I mean, surely he could show himself on S.H.I.E.L.D.?
We've made some mistakes along the way. Some very recently.
Oh, okay.
Oh, so you admit it was a mistake to not have him on there. So Moon Knight will definitely be in the final season of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. next year, yeah?
Nobody spills the secrets because nobody knows them all.
Oh, okay.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you, Nick. Those words. Look, we'll be sure to tidy up here. He's got a little bit of blood and flesh bits on it. We've just come from the West, the correctional facility, so we're a little bit shabby, but we'll be sure to clean up. We'll scrub up. We won't touch anything. It's all good.
The world has gotten even stranger than you already know.
Thank you. Well, Derek, wow, geez. Okay, there's a big man here. He's come to just see how things are because we're up to your final book, your top book. This is your top dog.
Yes.
Derek.
This I've specifically broken this one out for you, Ray. This normally sits in on the wall behind me in a cover.
Oh wow!
Wow!
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what Derek is alluding to is none other than Nick Fury, Agent of S.H.I.E.L.D., the number one, released in 1989 by Bob Hall, and a cover by Kim DeMolder.
Yes. Oh, I love this book. Yes, this is Nick Fury, Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., Volume 2. So the first book since the 70s, featuring Nick Fury as the central character, an ongoing series. So think about that, Moody fans. We had Strange Tales in the 60s. Eventually got about a 10-issue or 12-issue series in the 70s, and then nothing until the end of the 80s. We had a couple of little specials out there, but no ongoing series. So there you go.
I know, so we can't complain, really. And any Nick Fury S.H.I.E.L.D. fans, man, you've had it tough. But what an issue this one is, Derek. So I read this first from the list, obviously. Sometimes I have different ways of reading the list that people give me. I thought I'd give this one a crack first because I know Nick Fury, I know S.H.I.E.L.D. is such a big thing for you, and I read it. I thought this was great. How would you kind of summarise this first issue?
Well, and this is probably where the interesting part for me comes from. This is directly after probably my favourite Nick Fury short series, which is Nick Fury versus S.H.I.E.L.D. It was supposed to be the death knell, the final end to S.H.I.E.L.D. as a character in all of the comic books, this major organization. Yet this is the kind of restart of it all again. Nick Fury's on his own. He's retired, sort of, from S.H.I.E.L.D. for the first time since it started. And he's being followed and tracked down by effectively a newer version of Hydra, or at least his former nemesis Baron Strucker's gang, effectively, to catch him. So this is a brand new story starting back up Nick Fury and S.H.I.E.L.D. again, and from this point onwards, this is where I got into comic books. So this is carrying on my story of how I got into comic books. This is the issue that got me into comic books.
Ah, right, yeah, and so sorry, so Drake, so the one prior in 1970, so you read that retrospectively?
Yes, so effectively, for my 13th birthday, which was in October of 1989, my best friend gave me this issue of Nick Fury, Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. He knew I was a fan of spy stuff, like James Bond. Knew I liked kind of war stuff, like war movies, that kind of stuff. And he picked this up in the recently opened, at the time, Forbidden Planet. We never had a comic book store in Ireland at the time, and he picked this up for me for my birthday. And the minute I read it, I went, this is a massive universe. Most of the story is just contained within characters that you wouldn't know unless you read Nick Fury. There's no appearances by Captain America or anything like that.
No.
Very unusual for a first issue to have no appearances by any other major character in the Marvel universe. But it told me I needed to... It's my first book that I subscribed to. I got it every month. Went back and read Nick Fury versus S.H.I.E.L.D., which opened me up to that old world. And then, I've pretty much got every appearance of Nick Fury in comics that I could find purely because of this book.
And this issue as well, and Nick Fury versus S.H.I.E.L.D., similar characters. Obviously, the supporting characters here are very strong indeed.
Absolutely, and some quite recognisable to Marvel TV and movie fans as well, I'd say.
Yeah, that's right. I remember when, ages ago, Derek, when you recommended Nick Fury versus S.H.I.E.L.D., I got that digitally and I read it. I loved it. And that was my introduction to Mac, like Mackenzie.
Excellent, yes.
And I was like, oh, that's Mac. And because I think Mac was called Mac in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. back in the early season as well, so it was a little bit vague, but then Mac Mackenzie, it's like, oh, this is this guy, and oh God, what's it? D'Allegro, is that her name? Countess?
The Contessa D'Allegro della Fontaine. Yes, the Contessa. She's a massive character, has gone all the way back to the 60s. It's kind of the original love interest of Nick Fury when he was the Playboy James Bond character from the 60s. So she's always been around as a sidekick. Mac was this interesting guy that didn't really believe in S.H.I.E.L.D., this CIA operative, kind of the outsider perspective, and I think they have carried that through into the TV show, into Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., with that character of Mac, who's someone that saw S.H.I.E.L.D. a bit from the outside and kind of questioned the authority of S.H.I.E.L.D. a bit. So while I think I actually pointed this out in a S.H.I.E.L.D. chat group a couple of weeks ago, that's how much of a nerd I am, that the character of Mac on the TV show is based on Al Mackenzie in the books, and nobody knows it. It has gone down its own path. People have completely forgotten about Al Mackenzie from this run of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. So that does happen.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I was fortuitous to have read the thing around the same time S.H.I.E.L.D. came around when Mac was in. So I just thought they went together. Alexander Pierce as well.
Absolutely.
He's here, so some of you would know that he made an appearance as the director of S.H.I.E.L.D., right, in Winter Soldier.
Exactly.
Played by Robert Redford.
Yeah, not a very Robert Redford character in the comic books. He's absolutely dedicated to Nick Fury in the comics. He's the guy that Nick Fury went to and trained him up as his own agent outside of S.H.I.E.L.D., effectively, which I loved that arc that was in Nick Fury versus S.H.I.E.L.D., and then it was taken into this book as him being kind of the protege to Nick Fury. So very different to having Robert Redford in the role.
Yeah, and look, whoever your best friend is, Derek, he's probably got you right to a T when he got you this gift, because you used to say you like espionage. This is what I was going to ask you earlier. I was holding off on it. With your inclination towards S.H.I.E.L.D., if you had any interest in, say, war stories or war comics or spy thrillers and stuff. But yeah, you mentioned James Bond's a big one. That you like. So you're loving the Daniel Craig. How do you rank him amongst James Bond?
Craig is fantastic, and I think that's probably, if you lived in the UK and Ireland during the 80s, it would be a shock if you didn't spend every single Sunday watching one or other of the James Bond movies. It was just they were ubiquitous with a Sunday afternoon. Despite the fact they aren't amazing movies, looking back at them now, saw spy thrillers like that. As I've gotten older, I've watched loads of 70s movies. I went through a whole phase a couple of years ago of just watching 70s spy thrillers because I absolutely love that style. And I think what Nick Fury personifies is that kind of that style of spy thrillers. Those really intriguing thrillers, and I think what I love about him as a character over the years is they've shrank and expanded S.H.I.E.L.D. over and over again. Sometimes it's this massive organization with millions of people working for it, and sometimes it's just a team of 3 or 4 people with Nick Fury in the lead as this kind of shadowy figure. But that's all here in this one little issue. Where you can see these massive machinations going on in the world, and you can see this tiny group of people as well that he's surrounded by. So I really do think this is it's my introduction. So it's for me, it's the quintessential introduction. But you can find so many other issues that would speak to you if you do like the character.
Yeah, it's a very strong issue, and as you say, it's so different from, not only because it's an older book now, reading it compared to what I'm reading now, but it is. Yeah, it's its own corner in the Marvel universe. It's very well. I'd say it's very well written. It's surprising, actually, the way it was written. And sorry, when was it released again? 1989. Okay, yeah. There's still. I mean, you could argue that the style of the way it was written is quite different to those of the late 80s, early 90s. It seems a lot more, I don't know, I don't say thoughtful, because I don't want to put down the rest of the other comics, because they're all very thoughtful as well, but very much in that genre, I guess, of the espionage. So there's a lot of intricate things happening. Who is this? Derek, maybe you can explain this to me. Who is this lump? This lump intrigues me, this little fella.
I know.
Is it a mutant under there, or...?
It is not, no. If you'll remember in Nick Fury versus S.H.I.E.L.D., the Deltites took over the inside of S.H.I.E.L.D. and Hydra and all of those different groups.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Right.
So Lump is the last surviving member of the Deltites, so completely, intricately connected to Nick Fury versus S.H.I.E.L.D. So you can probably understand, as a 13-year-old kid, when I read it, I was exactly the same as you, which was, I can't wait to find out who that character is. And I think it went through about 20 issues before they actually addressed it.
Wow.
And you wouldn't have even noticed in Nick Fury versus S.H.I.E.L.D. that career is somewhere in there as well. Yeah. But they don't really explain it. He's an intriguing little character in the background for a lot of issues.
Well, so. I mean, him and the little... Oh, sorry, I got that mixed around. Him, who is little, and the Death's Heads, the two killers that you see at the beginning, are very violent as well. I mean, there's no holds barred here. They kill the two agents, and you see, I mean, like, maybe it is actually typical of some of the 90s comics later on where you actually see a lot of stuff, like they snap or they break this woman's neck in the first instance there. There are plenty of 90s comics where you'd argue, shouldn't that be a Max comic, which tone is a bit more censored. That's not to be, there's nothing like that here. Apart from the Death's Heads and Lump, that's the only kind of connection to the rest of the Marvel Universe for me, Derek, because it's a little, out of the ordinary. They're a little spectacular. Apart from those two, it's pretty much a solid kind of spy thriller. I love also what we do see, Dum Dum Dugan as well. He has a little bit of a what would you say? It's not like an origin. It's kind of, there's a turning point for him here.
Yeah. By the end, he hasn't survived the issue. And I suppose that's one of the big things, is he's been a character that's been around since the early 60s at the side of Nick Fury. Nick Fury is one of those really weird characters where they gave an origin and a reason why he has long life, but forgot to give that origin to any of the sidekicks that were around him. Up until Original Sin, actually, there's a little tiny touch there. They didn't give a reason why everybody else that was in his crew in World War II is still, early 30s or late 30s, all the way along for the rest of the season. So Dum Dum Dugan was someone that was right beside him from back in the early 60s, and then he gets killed in this first issue of a brand new book. In a way, it was them, effectively, because Nick Fury versus S.H.I.E.L.D. was throwing away the past and saying, let's start again. This book is saying, right, we really mean it, everything going out here, and we're starting this from scratch.
Yeah, pretty bold. I mean, it's a pretty bold, move, because, nothing to take away from Dum Dum as well. It's not like, they're killing Spider-Man or anything, but if you're a S.H.I.E.L.D. fan, he's a pretty big character.
Absolutely.
So, that was quite a shock as well. I'm just going through the issue here, Derek, and then so you have Nick. Obviously, he's honing his skills. He's been, missing for a while. They do find him. Who he's with? I'm just trying to look at the lady with the glasses.
Kate Neville.
Okay.
Kate Neville again. Yeah, I think as I mentioned earlier, you'll find with Mooney and with characters like Doctor Strange and with Nick Fury, you'll find that when they disappear off the books for a couple of years, they completely forget about all their supporting characters. Kate Neville was a character that he kind of picked up and made join his crew back in Nick Fury versus S.H.I.E.L.D. She stayed around for the entirety of this run, this 48-issue run, and then I think he didn't have another run up until 2002, if I'm right, maybe a bit earlier than that.
Wow.
So all of those characters are gone as well. Al Mackenzie doesn't appear again. We do get Alexander Pierce comes back, but Kate Neville's gone after this run.
Yeah, wow. Because, like, you know, yeah, I mean, she's one of the core crew, obviously, here. I mean, she's featured on the front as well. Nice cover. I'm just looking at that as well. That was by the Molder. Yeah. That's more of a modern looking the classic cover. Oh, actually, sorry, I'm looking at the it was a retouch up.
Oh right, yeah, on the digital. Yeah. My physical copy that has been sitting on my wall for over 10 years. So it's still beautiful. I still think that there's the training montage of Nick Fury in the middle of the book, where he's in his own danger room, I guess. If anybody's an X-Men fan, that's what it feels like. He has his own danger room to keep himself trained. Like, this guy is in his 70s effectively, but he's still keeping himself polished like any younger kid, which I think is one of the great little montage there.
Yeah, no, absolutely brilliant. Yeah, so I mean, no points. Yeah, I mean, like, this has a very nostalgic value for you as well, Derek, but as well as touching all the points of what you kind of, you know, what you're into. War stories as well, and military stuff. Did you follow a lot of war comics before, or were you into war movies and stuff, or how did that?
You know, genuinely, I like a few war movies. Not a massive fan, but Nick Fury led me to so many weird destinations over the years, into space and into space comics and into war comics and into spy comics. You know, it's amazing how he's been used by so many writers to go in different areas of the Marvel universe. But certainly, war comics was something that I never would have read if it hadn't been for Nick Fury. And there is a great Sergeant Fury. There's one absolutely great Sergeant Fury issue number 8. Where he loses his first his fiance gets killed in that issue, and that's something that, if you read any war comics at that time, early 60s particularly, it was all about, here's the diverse team getting together to take down the Nazis, and that's what most of Nick Fury comic books are about. The Sergeant Fury and his Howling Commandos, that's what most of them are about. But that issue, in issue 8, is kind of a turning point for Nick Fury as a character. He never really settles on a relationship from that point onwards. And it's a really interesting little comic to check out. It's another one to have a look at.
Okay, so number 8, definitely. I was about to ask you just finally as well, Derek, but you probably answered me just then. So does he ever have any love interest with Kate or with the Countess?
Yes.
Oh, he does.
Both.
Oh, okay.
Yes, both.
Oh, it hasn't stopped him. Obviously, issue 8 is.
Yeah, but he never gets married over the course of his career. He's always he does have that James Bond mold. Effectively, he had that one love that was lost in Pamela Hawley, I think is the character's name from Sergeant Fury. And then over the years, the relationship with the Contessa and the relationship with Kate Neville changes. But particularly the Contessa, her storyline is a massive storyline. Eventually, when they use her really well. Secret Warriors would be the one to check out for a great Contessa story.
Okay, and is that Jonathan Hickman? No,
it's Hickman and Bendis. Yeah, Bendis kicked it off, and then Hickman ran with it. Jonathan Hickman's did the majority of the run, but I think they started off, plotted out the first couple of issues together, and then Hickman took it and ran with it. It's amazing.
Well, Looney listeners, that will most definitely be in our show notes as well for you to check out, as well as Derek's 4 books are now revealed to you on this podcast. So I can vouch for all 4 of them here. They're very, very cool, very solid selections, Derek, and very diverse as well. So it was really, really a nice selection, and thank you so much for going through the arduous task of actually trying to find 4 issues.
Thank you so much for inviting me on, and it is almost impossible to pick not just 4 Nick Fury issues.
Yeah.
So I'm glad I was able to pick other stuff. So.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Walking Dead. I mean, that's a brilliant series, and these are just like touchstones as well, aren't they? I mean, like, you know, if you are on the island, they would jog all these kind of Original Sin as well. You got your issue 6 there. That would kind of jog your memory for the whole of the series. So very well chosen, and very well chosen for you to last your infinite time on the desert island. You know, not that we ever wish anyone has to be on a desert island for thank you very much, Derek, and thank you so much for elucidating your thoughts on getting into comics and also the ins and outs of podcasting.
Thank you so much, Ray, for having me on board. It's an absolute pleasure. I've been looking forward to this one for a long time.
Yeah.
I didn't quite hit the 3.5 hours that Chris did, but I could have talked for hours with you.
Believe me as well, I've been looking forward to this for ages as well. It's so cool to be able to talk to you face to face, rather than just online. So it's been absolutely brilliant. As we sail away on the helicarrier, there's some people there playing Gallagher. There's someone on deck there. I can see the sun to our left. Next phase, we are going into a waning crescent, so that is our Lunar Peak Classic Run review. And fingers crossed, I'm going to try to get another loony involved. Nudge, wink, wink. Luis, he's given me a nudge. He wants to get into some classic Moon Knight issues. We'll be covering Moon Knight Volume 1, Issue 8, so join us next week for that. As for where you can find us, as usual, we are on email, itkmoonnight@gmail.com. We have a website, we've got two actually, you might as well say it, Into the Night Podcast at wordpress.com, but also the same information is also on our intothenight.libsyn.com website. We're on Facebook, facebook.com/itkmoonnight, that's our page, and we have an absolutely awesome group, very fun to talk all things Moon Knight and comics in general, at facebook.com/group/itkmoonnight. We're on Twitter, our handle is itkmoonnight, obviously, and obviously they're Derek again, and of course we're on Instagram, Tumblr, YouTube. Just search for Into the Night with a K, Moon Knight Podcast. Last couple of things, house cleaning, iTunes ratings. Please, if you can, leave a rating or review. That would really help us, just to expose ourselves a little bit more in the nice way to people out there to come on board and maybe listen to us if they are so inclined. Also, as well, we're all available on a wide variety of podcast catchers: Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, SoundCloud, iHeartRadio, Podcoin even as well. So if you want to earn some coin for listening, give that a go. But yes, we're all on that. So, Derek,
one final one from me before you close it out, right?
Sure.
Loony listeners, share the podcast. We say this on our podcast.
Oh, yes.
Everybody that does podcasting does it for a bit of fun. If you just share it, some of your friends might be interested in it. Just click that share button and share it in your social media. So hopefully, other people that like Moon Knight that you might know might give the podcast a go.
That is very cool indeed. Yes, please, listeners, listen to Derek. If you can, just share the podcast, share it around. We'd be eternally grateful. And thank you. That'll be awesome. Good idea, Derek.
There you go. Share the podcast. Shares the love. You see.
So, although we are on this helicarrier, Derek, you do have a shotgun. You do have an axe. You do look a little bit out of place. You are covered in gristle and blood and bone. I think we better get you off to the quarters there to get your shield outfit kitted out. But with that, Derek, as we always say, I think Khonshu watch over the denizens of the night. Catch you later.
Thanks, Ray.
Moon Knight and affiliated characters, stories and events are properties of Marvel Characters Incorporated. Materials used and discussed within the podcast are intended for critique and review purposes only under the fair dealing concept of the current Copyright Act. The views, information or opinions expressed during the podcast are solely those of the individuals involved and do not necessarily represent those of the copyright owners.